Welcome everybody. Today is August 12, 2014, Tuesday. This is the Board of County Commissioners, Pickens County, Colorado work session. And we are starting the afternoon off with the discussion of the Redstone Boulevard North Bridge rail discussion. GR is here to fill us in, our county engineer.
Thanks, Rob. Again, I'm GR Fielding, the county engineer. Today I'm joined by Mike Fowler. He's a structural engineer and project engineer with SGM out of Glenwood Springs. As Rob mentioned, we'll talk about the North Bridge on Redstone Boulevard. The bridge rail failed at the end of this last winter. Our maintenance crews have gone up and tacked up some wood to tie us over until we could figure out what we'd like to do long term for that bridge. To set a little bit of context, I got a couple of screen grabs from Google Earth. This is the bridge at the north end of Redstone Boulevard. I wanted to show this picture to show you how close it is to State Highway 133 here. And then to get a little bit of a wider angle, at the top, unfortunately it's a little bit hard to see now, but there's a yellow pin placed on the bridge here. Downtown Redstone, if you will, is located here, and Carbondale would be up off the screen. The bridge sees a pretty wide variance of traffic counts. When I looked up the traffic counts recently, what I noticed is that during the winter we have about 125 to 150 vehicles a day crossing the bridge. During July, we can have upwards of 11 or 1,200 vehicles crossing the bridge on any given day. That was really surprising to us because usually we don't see quite that much variance on a lot of our roads, even with the seasonality. Our average there is about 350 vehicles a day. The nice thing about our existing bridge here is it does actually have a fairly wide template as it exists. It's over 26 feet wide, and the reason that is because the existing bridge rail that's there is tacked onto the side of the bridge and not mounted to the top of the bridge. So you get to use almost the entire width of that deck. Going through looking at what we had existing there, Mike and I had discussed that the bridge is in very good condition. The recent ratings that CDOT does for us have ranged from the mid-80s into the low 90s for structure, and so that means the bridge is in great shape. It's just the railing that's really in poor condition. And so when we started talking about what type of rails we should look at, we discussed replacing the existing rails. But I'm of the belief that if we're going to touch it, we should do it to our current standards. The current standards revolve around crash testing and the worthiness to if a vehicle is to crash up against that rail. That's what it's really there for, is to make sure that vehicles don't exit the bridge if they get into an accident on the bridge. The current bridge rail is not crash tested. It's very difficult to assume or to try to calculate what that crash worthiness is unless you actually go through testing, which is extremely costly. We identified 4 options to look at. We brought those options to the Redstone Community Association and also the Crystal River Caucus. Both of those community groups selected the same bridge rail as their favorite, along with staff and SGM also have the same recommendation to the board as far as which rail to move forward with. And that was a timber rail that is from the New York Department of Transportation. And we can go back and talk about all the different options, but I'd actually like to bring this one up first. It's a moderately priced option. It leaves us with a very similar width on the bridge. All of our other options actually narrowed the bridge up pretty considerably. Mike did the drawings here, and one of the things I really like about these is you can see a shadow here, and that's the existing bridge rail. So you can see the difference between the existing rail and the proposed rail. to kind of get an idea of the difference that it'll look like. And there's not much significance in the difference. The Crystal River Caucus did request that we put an additional rail on top of this to ensure that pedestrians don't lean over the railing and fall into the river. I actually think by lowering the rail some, we'll have people leaning on the rail to look into the river a little bit less, but that'll be a discussion item that we can have. Mike, was there anything else that you wanted to?
I just like to talk. We did look at 3 other options, and our options kind of range from more of the CDOT industrial urban type to some of these more aesthetic. They call them aesthetic rails. So Federal Highways they've developed some other rail types for use in national parks and more scenic areas. So we looked at those, and this one seemed to, like GR said, seemed to fit the bridge the best. It maintained that roadway width, and I think it's something that can be fairly easily constructed and attached to the existing bridge without a lot of modification to the existing bridge. And it is, and GR, I may be jumping ahead here, but we looked at each one of those rails had different, they're all crash tested. They've all been crash tested by some DOT agency that's paid for a crash test. So that they were all crash worthy in the eyes of Federal Highways. So some of them, this one has a higher level than some of the other ones, but
the last thing that I'd like to note is the actual cost of the project. When we started talking about this, we started looking at different things that would add into the cost. The $125,000 that I had put into the board's agenda item summary is probably a little bit high, but we wanted to build in plenty of contingency. A few things to note, though, is no matter what railing we were to pick, things like construction surveying, field engineering and inspection, the guardrails that tie in to the bridge, that's another thing that we noted is the existing, there's either none or they're inadequate, the existing guardrails that tie into the bridge rail. So if it's another thing is once we touch this, we should install adequate guardrail to lead up to that bridge. Those things pretty much remain constant no matter which option that we pick. And so out of that figure, I'd say probably 40% of that project is a fairly constant number. And so the real cost differential between a vanilla bridge rail, like the CDOT Type 10R that you see all over the place, the galvanized steel, and this NIDOT timber rail option is probably under $10,000 difference.
Rachel?
Yeah, 2 questions. One, I'm just curious, it kind of looks from the illustrations that you'll need to drill into the concrete to mount it. Is there a potential that the concrete would shear off or crack off from doing that? And, is that a pretty solid way to approach it? And then the second is, what is the lifetime difference between the different railings?
You want to?
well, on the concrete, that it's hard to see in that photo, but it has a fairly substantial depth on the edge of the bridge there, where the deck overhangs the outside beams. I believe that's around 10 inches thick. If we were designing a new bridge deck for this, we'd have to look at how much force, if someone did hit the bridge rail, how much force that would put into the bridge deck, and we'd have to design the bridge deck accordingly. With the retrofit, you're going to get what you get unless you replace the whole deck. But what I would say is that edge, that's 10 inches thick, and that's thicker than most bridge decks that we.
So the process of drilling into it, now that it's already completed, you don't feel will
Compromise it?
Yeah, and have it chipping off, and then we have to kind of redo a new deck or something.
No, I don't see that as being a problem. we would go in with they'd probably go in with about a 3/4 inch or 1 inch diameter hammer drill bit, and drill that out and epoxy in some anchor bolts. That's pretty
Standard.
Pretty standard.
Okay.
And as far as design life, with the high rating of the actual structure of the bridge, I'm guessing that all of these rails are probably a 50 or 75 year design life, and so that'll match the longevity of the lifespan of the bridge.
Yeah. The only thing I'm really thinking of is the city's No Problem Bridge right over down here by Heron Park. And I remember them placing the railings and actually getting a pedestrian sideway and things like that. And then it didn't seem to be even 20 years later before the railings had rotted out so much that they had to replace them. And so I just don't know if they didn't keep up the treatments on it or they had unusual circumstance, but...
This type of timber is actually similar to it's a laminated wood, and we use a laminated wood for all of the bridges over the Roaring Fork that go in near Woody Creek. So Lower River Road, Jerboz, and on Smith Hill. And so it's a similar type of product, and those have held up.
Okay. Thank you.
Michael and then Steve.
Yeah, similar question to Rachel's. It seems like kind of a shaky attachment, just one bolt through there, or maybe there's two at the base. Wouldn't it be better to have an angle iron underneath the bridge that's the length of the bridge and attach and be able to make multiple attachment points to that and then attach to that angle iron? I mean, that's the way I would do it, because it would be connected together and tend to share the force, the length of if someone were to crash into it, it wouldn't just have a point there. So that's the way I would do it. And then but I'm not an engineer. But and the other thing is, in the sketch you have there, the bottom rail is flush with the deck, and hopefully you're allowing some space there for drainage, because that's a problem on the bridge too. So.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I can speak to a couple of those points there.
Yeah, that was raised by Redstone as well, that this is against the deck as opposed to in this photograph. There's a gap there and there's a gap here.
Yeah. And so what this detail is showing, there's actually two rails on the bottom. One is what we call a scupper block, and then one is the continuous curb rail. And so the scupper blocks are split, so there is drainage that can exit out, and your drainage can exit out between those scupper blocks. And then the other, so it's not a continuous rail attached directly to the deck. But the curb rail, that is continuous rail, and you were asking about the connection. So you'd have one connection in here from the side of from the post into the side of the bridge. You have another bolt right there that connects from the post into the curb rail, and you can see that in this right in there. Sorry, a little shaky, but and so this might be getting into the details too much, but most of the force is actually transferred through that bolt right there. And then once that force goes through that bolt, it then distributes along that curb rail. And then where you have the scupper, you have multiple bolts that connect the scupper block.
Okay, so it's essentially the same thing that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Just multiple connection points.
Yeah. And one of the things we'll want to look at, you did raise a good question. If we want to put a piece of angle iron or something underneath the deck, that is an option. We may end up core drilling all the way through the deck and then bolting from the underside. That would be something we'd want to look at. The NIDOT rail that's intended more for new construction where they can embed those anchor bolts in there. We're doing retrofit here, so there might be a few tweaks from these details as we've shown now. This bridge rail, well, the one on the left is the actual NIDOT rail. It's new construction. This one here is actually, it's not the NIDOT rail, but it's similar, and I put that in there just because I had that photo. That's from an actual crash test facility in Lincoln, Nebraska that I worked at in college, and that was actually my timber rail that was being built and tested there. So that's how we had to go through all the engineering, the dynamics to get those connections, and what we found was that you spread that load out through those scupper blocks into the deck, and that's the best way to connect it to a bridge deck.
So does a student drive a truck into the edge?
Grad student.
Grad student.
Yeah, no, it's actually pretty fascinating. It was really interesting working there. You'd see pickups run into that rail at 65 miles an hour, and see all the carnage, and
Wow.
big U-Haul trucks run in at 50 miles an hour. It was interesting. And then, if it didn't pass, I didn't graduate. So.
Mike actually brought up one really good point, is all of these drawings that we have up right now are preliminary design, and they're kind of pulled from the standard, and as we get into final design of any option, we'll have to figure out what type of connections, how it gets cored in, put together those specifications to ensure that we don't get damage to our bridge deck, that we have adequate connection to that bridge deck, and that it's structurally stable.
Rob?
Yeah, Steve?
Your drawings don't show the handrail that the caucus people requested. Would that be the big square piece on the right, on the outer extremes of the drawing going up farther, or would there be some other piece then bolted on to this that would go up farther?
We actually haven't gotten into that piece of design yet. We wanted to weigh that option with the board before we directed SGM to take a look at how that attachment would happen and what that would look like. So that'd probably be a good dovetail into that part of the conversation.
George?
Yeah, so what's the height from the platform to the top right now for this?
2 feet 9 inches.
So this option is 2 feet 9 inches. I believe that the existing is 40 total.
Yeah, I think that sounds.
I can go back to the existing drawing. Yeah, that existing is 40 inches. So 3 feet 4 inches versus 2 feet 9 inches.
Okay, so it's quite a bit lower.
Let's see. So that's 40 to 35.
8 inches. 8 inches lower.
9, 33, 7 inches.
7 inches.
7 inches.
Oh, 7 inches.
And a standard pedestrian rail height is 42 inches minimum. And then you get into the taller ones that are, if you have bicycles, then you might want to go up to 54 inches. But typically, if we want to put a pedestrian rail on a bridge, it's 42. So we would be looking at extending that up, what do we say,
About-
about 11 inches.
Yeah.
Which, sorry, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to ask if there's a possibility of adding like a cast iron feature, kind of like a handrail type piece. I drew something in on mine that kind of comes up with a handrail. So, you've got something to hold on to if you are jeopardized of falling over the edge, as opposed to doing additional wood structure on there. Probably do it a lot lighter and more efficiently with some sort of cast iron construction fabricated somewhere. And just have a little add-on. I mean, obviously, you propose this, so it's not a requirement for safety-wise. It's not a pedestrian bridge. But there, the concern of Redstone was that it's used as a pedestrian bridge quite often. So, people, I don't know if people fish off it or what, but.
I was thinking something similar, that rather than another big heavy block of wood and having to bring the side blocks of wood up that much more, but I was thinking more of a single railing in the center, not cantilevered out or anything like that, but just something that came up like a handrail in the center of it. I can see the safety concern, and I think that would be appropriate to plan it all at the same time.
Steve?
I think the handrail would be wise because people could get vertigo looking down at the water. get
Yeah.
dizzy, fall over and fall in the river, just totally, not that they intend to, not that they're even that close to it, but
Yeah.
just ought to be, err on the side of safety for pedestrians. I think that would be wise.
But otherwise, I'm comfortable with the potential financing, and it needs to be done, and let's do it right and have it last a while.
Great. Is that enough direction to go forward? I think we've got some support on a handrail, barring some outrageous cost, but I think
Yeah, well-
something can be done fairly reasonably.
Now, I would say that we would probably want to put the handrail, offset it back behind the traffic rail.
Away from the traffic.
Yeah, away from the traffic back there, and whether we bring something up from the post or something up from the rail itself. I think in general, you like to have those types of additional railings set back from the face of the rail, just in case someone does run into that rail. They're not, the rail is designed and tested as is, and if you start putting additional
Yeah, that's the question in terms
elements
of.
on there, you like to have those away from the traffic.
I think the direction I would give, if the board so sees fit, is for your judgment to take our advice towards a final design.
Well, we'll move this forward. If there's, we'll bring back a memo with where we land with what that railing looks like. And so long as we're within what we've proposed dollar-wise, we'll continue moving forward.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes before we're going to be joined by the Aspen School District Board. We want to try to just go through future agendas. There wasn't a lot on future agendas that I had comments on, so. But if anybody has comments on future agenda.
We received an invitation for all the board for a picnic on the pass, Wednesday, August 20th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. I can pass this around, and they asked for an RSVP, so we can do that for you. And that's the only thing that I have for future agendas.
It's the Independence Pass Foundation's
Yeah, you'll have to
event
send my
on
regrets,
Monday.
that's during Water Congress.
Yeah, Rachel and I can't make that.
Anybody else have anything on future agendas? No, I thought it was pretty straightforward. We want to try to tackle a open discussion topic. We've got 7 minutes.
I'd rather take a break. and
Okay,
be
let's
ready
take a
now.
break for 7 minutes.
Get a little
Check our emails.
So George and Mike.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's
Welcome,
been a
welcome
long
back,
time.
everybody. Again, today is Tuesday, August 12, 2014. This is the Board of County Commissioners work session. We are joined for our next agenda item by the Aspen School District Board, or some members of the Aspen School District Board. We've got a couple items. But I'd like to start just by going around for the cameras and everybody introductions. And I'll start. My name is Rob Ittner. I'm the current chair of the Board of County Commissioners.
Rachel Richards, County Commissioner.
I'm Susan Meralt on the Board of Education.
And I'm Sandy Pierce on the Board of Education.
I'm Sheila Kennedy Wills. I'm the current president of the Board of Education.
Bob Clay, I'm on the Board of Education.
Annie Cassidy, I'm on the Board of Education.
Steve Child, County Commissioner.
Mike Owsley, County Commissioner.
George Newman.
Welcome. We had put a couple items on our discussion packet for just to start off the discussion, and the first one was we're always looking at what the housing needs are, and you're obviously a big employer, and if there were any concerns or direction that you were going in as a school board district in terms of finding housing to be competitive to bring people to this higher cost of living area and some of the challenges around that.
I'll start. I believe, and please, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we engage Sally Sheepman Miller to manage much of our housing. And so she has a pretty good ear to the ground of what at least the immediate needs are or desires of the people who are in the housing or who are immediately looking for housing. And I met with her informally on the street. I haven't met with her more formally, but one of the more recent things that came up was we need places that have dogs or are dog friendly. And it's an interesting comment, and you know, when you go to build housing, we already have 42, 46 units, something like that. One of the challenges we have is we don't necessarily always have the right type of unit, size-wise, in terms of what people are looking for, and we certainly don't have many dog-friendly units. So that may be something where we can collaborate on as we move forward, but that's what I know from right now.
All of our housing is taken up by employees. And this year, I think we were scrambling around to find additional housing for about 19 more employees. And we're kind of hogtied by our own success in some ways, because it used to be that our staff would move into the housing that we own, and they would stay 3 to 5 years, and then they would move out. And then we'd have that unit available for new staff coming in, and that does not occur much anymore. We had very little turnover in housing this year. In fact, I don't think we had maybe 1, maybe 2 units turnover. And so that's a problem for us. We also have no additional land in the district to build any more housing. We've got, there's a parcel at our Woody Creek West Ranch housing that we could potentially build on, but it's not the best site in the world, let's just put it that way, but it is a site. So there's some potential there. I think one of the two of the issues that we deal with most are how can we help our staff move from employee housing into either some type of longer-term housing, and we're struggling with that. One of the things, too, I think from our new staff that we're struggling with, and that maybe we can work together on, is there's a requirement now that people have to live here for a period of time before they can go into any kind of employee housing that's owned by the county or the city. And for us, we consider our employees to be kind of essential employees. They're very important to this area. I mean, I think you could look at, the police, kind of on the same levels as you look at for, police and hospital workers. And if we could get some kind of special dispensation for our folks who are maybe moving in for the first time, who have the wherewithal to buy a place, that if we could work out some kind of mechanism where they could go straight into that available housing that is not owned by the district, that would be really helpful for us.
We end up with certain crunch periods, teachers leave and teachers come. We've had less people leaving the housing that we have. We still have teachers leaving from time to time. And then when the new groups come in, we don't have space for them at the last minute, and there's usually a scramble. So to the degree that even on a short-term basis, it would be nice to have additional flexibility.
Rachel?
Yeah, a couple things. I guess as we continue the conversation, I'm interested in, are you planning longer term to create more units? And, I realize budgeting is always the problem there, but it would seem that the funds that you do have from the city sales tax are not restricted to your needs the same way some of the state restrictions are on your mill levy and teacherages, or whatever they call the cottages you're able to create. But I can only tell you honestly, I could never support a change in the priority system like that. It's just there's too many groups. You suddenly have all the child care centers in the community, and early childhood education is very important, and then the police, and then the sheriff, and then hospital workers, and then everyone else, and you start to say, well, who is the housing being built for? Before it gets to, quote, a regular bank manager or someone like that, there's going to be nothing left. And then there's also no assuring that someone doesn't take a teaching job for a year so they can get in the housing and then leave you. And they've just been bumped to the head of the line, and they got ahead of everybody else, and now they are a bank manager, and so they got a priority, but they didn't use it. And so, it's very difficult, especially for me, when you look at the fact that you are a taxing entity and you have abilities to create or to go to the voters or to work with in your budgets to create more housing. And I think it's just been debated in the community too many times. Are you trying to say that a ski patrol is less important than this person, and someone who volunteers all the time, but the teacher doesn't volunteer? I mean, it just gets into weighing the value of a person and a person's lives in ways that I think is such a slippery slope, and the community has just rejected time and again, even though there's great demand, even though there's great need, and it certainly is an essential service. But I think it's more about working for partnerships to find ways we all create more housing for the pool. And within the county, we've been able to receive mitigation funds from new free market development, and we're allowed to, quote, keep all of that to use to house county employees by state law and the statutes. But we are putting, as a policy, half of the units that we're able to create into the general lottery pool. And we're also really using our housing funds to try and get down to those category 2 and 3 lower income families, which are radically underserved in our community as a whole. So,
Yeah.
And you
I mean,
mentioned,
that's just I'm only speaking for myself in terms of the
Right.
priority system, but it is quite a struggle.
One of the challenges I think as a board member sitting on the school board that I have is we are rapidly, in my mind, approaching trying to redefinition of what our role is in the community by building as much housing as we're building. I mean, we're already housing, we already have 42, 46, whatever the number is right now, units. And it takes a lot of time and effort, which I don't consider a primary responsibility of our school board, to manage this asset. It's a big asset, and there's a lot of expense structure around it, and management time devoted to it. And so, I hesitate to say that we should be a employer, owner of housing, and to the degree beyond where we are right now. We're looking for creative solutions that are hopefully potentially even free market solutions, because I think one of the things that I've observed over the last 6 years on the board is there's a period of time in 3 to 8 years of a younger teacher's life where they go through not a metamorphosis, potentially, but changes where they reevaluate whether or not this is a place that they can make it long term. And it may be the case that they're in our housing or some other person's housing, and they realize that there's just no sustainable place for them to call their own. I mean, it's the truth with everybody. I get that. But it's really disruptive when we have the turnover we have in our area. Not that it isn't for others too.
Just a real quick follow-up. I mean, maybe there's potential to pursue legislative fix at the school finance that would allow you to sell those cottages. Not that the overall funding formula or anything else, but if you were allowed to sell with a clause that you have to resell to a new school district employee when you move out, you could pull a lot of your cash back out of the units you've already created and be able to then create more. It doesn't solve that dilemma of the management aspect, or if you could contract with someone, but it would give you money you already have without a new tax to be able to create more units that are perhaps more of the transitional units you're talking about until people can qualify in the lottery. And in the county, I think we have a series of policies to help our own employees potentially buy in the greater pool, but we don't give them any priority in the housing office lotteries, but an ability to pull more money out of your retirement to buy a unit for down payment assistance and things like that. And so we make sure our human resources sends out the weekly listings of what is for sale in the community.
And we do that. We do have a $50,000 5-year loan package that we give to, that we have available for our employees. And I understand that, you know, everybody wants to be an essential service worker. And I know that's hard to do. And, you know, maybe that's a solution that's not workable on a whole. Maybe it's workable for 10 units. Maybe it's workable for 5 units. Maybe there's a rule that says, you know, the day you don't work for the school district, then, you know, 3 months later you have to move out of your unit. I mean, I think there are ways to craft language that may address some of the issues that you were talking about. But I also believe that this is not just a school board issue. This is just not a school district issue. This is a community-wide issue. And I think we all understand that. And it's just something that everybody's trying to find a creative solution for. All of our housing is rental housing. We don't have any for sale housing. We do have some units that are quote teacher housing, close quote, that are up in 5 trees, but that was done on a deed restriction, not on a ownership basis from the school district. That was a developer decision. So it's not like we have the ability to, I mean, I guess we could condominiumize and try to sell our units, but I don't think that gets us where we want to be, because where we want to be is we want these to be transitional units so that once you become established, you're able to find longer-term housing.
Because many of our facilities are obviously 100% district employees, and you want to have some cross-pollination and diversity in your ownership or in your housing partners. And I think that's healthy. I'm not sure Rowan does. But, I think that's a big challenge. So.
Yeah, and we even have long-term employees now who are on the list for district housing who maybe have moved down valley or in an area where, you know, they're not as comfortable as they would be, so they want to move back into the district. So, you know, it's a constant battle, and you guys have to run up against the same thing. And we do try to do a lot of things for our employees to help them find housing. I think that Kate Fuentes, who is our CFO, spent a lot of time this fall just making sure that all of our new teachers had a place to live. And some of that is, you know, placement in people's homes and accessory dwelling units and just using every contact we have.
Rachel alluded to partnerships. You know, I mean, we've got this rent money fund, and we're always looking for partnerships for economies of scale to potentially develop.
You mean the mitigation fund, not the rent fund?
You're right, not the rent fund, the employee housing mitigation fund, not the energy fund, to do projects. So, you know, if something comes up where there's a development, I think we would be delighted to look at something where it was in a partnership with the school, the hospital, or whatever, to you know, join forces to get some sort of project done along that way.
Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, Rachel referred to the sales tax dollars that we have coming in. And Rachel, what we've really used those for is strictly operational.
budget.
And I can tell you that even with those dollars, additional dollars that have come in, that in order to provide the, our regular steps, and what we call step is, and it's when you maybe get your master's, so you move up, you know, in a different category, but just plain steps and raises, we dipped into our reserves to the tune of over $500,000 this year, just to make sure that our staff got their raises and steps that we thought they deserved. Is that sustainable? Absolutely not. Without the sales tax money, would we be able to do that? Absolutely not. So, you know, it's you guys all do this in your budget. It's that balancing act between, you know, how do we provide for our staff, and how do we educate our kids, and how do we all do it on the money that we have?
Yeah.
And that, you know, it's just it's tough, and you have to make hard decisions sometimes.
Which leads us to our next topic, which is kind of school financing and what your current situation is and potential long-term planning. Is there thought of additional mill levy expansions? Is there, you know,
Where are we going?
where are you going?
Where are we going?
How you doing and where are you going?
Yeah, I'll start the dialogue and let you go into more detail. I think where Susan Maralt and I are working closely with Kate Fuentes, the Aspen sales tax that it helps us out sunsets in 2016. And that's sooner than we all think it is. And it was a bold step for the city voters to help us out to the benefit of all of the school district's students, which are beyond the city of Aspen's city limits. And so I think there really needs to be a financial community discussion, which might involve APEF, which is the entity that helps us receive that money, Aspen Public Education Fund, Aspen Education Foundation, the school board, and perhaps other community entities such as BOCC, Aspen Snowmass Village, Town Council, all of those. We really need to have some fairly meaningful dialogue relatively soon, so we know what options truly are on the table to present to voters, for us as school board members to begin thinking about how we're going to finance things beyond 2016. In addition, I think you and Sandra just met with Millie Hamner, and there may be some potential changes at the state level around mill levies, but you know, what we've learned at least over the last 5 years is we really can't bank on anything, because as soon as you think you've got some momentum in a direction, it gets pulled from you, not necessarily financially, just in terms of the content of the legislation. So it's a personal thought now, not necessarily a board representative thought. You know, to the degree that we can help strengthen the local sources of our funding, I think the stronger we'll be in the long run. I don't know what that looks like or what content that will look like, but I think that it's something that we have uniquely available to us here in Aspen versus some other parts of the state to consider. So,
and here's the bottom line. I know you guys probably have read the paper about school finance, but basically we're being underfunded to the tune of somewhere between $2 million and $2.7 million. And the state will say, this is what it takes for you guys to effectively educate your children in the Aspen School District. But we don't have the money, so we're not going to give it to you.
that is, the state doesn't have the money.
That is, the state doesn't have the money, so the state's not giving us the money. And that's fine. We understand that. We had hoped at some point in time those dollars would come back. They call that the negative factor. And at some point in time, we hoped those dollars would come back. And I think it's very clear now that those dollars will never come back. So what we need to do is look for other sources of funding. And that's when our voters were kind enough to give us the sales tax out of Aspen, that was amazing for us. And it was the difference between laying off teachers and having larger classes and being able to move forward in the way we've been able to. There is a chance that right now we can raise no more dollars from mill levy except for capital improvements, things like transportation and technology. Yeah. There is a chance that the Colorado legislature is going to change that and raise the amount of dollars we can look at for a mill levy. But right now there's no promise of that. So when we're looking at local funding, we have to look at other creative sources, and that's where the sales tax came in. And when that sunsets, I think Bob's absolutely right. I think we have to go to our voters, including the business community, and see what they think is tolerable. And that's a conversation that, as Bob says, needs to start sooner than later.
Just to build a consensus, because I think there'll be a lot of different voices and different potential solutions to it, and there's no real forum currently available to do that, so it's going to have to be through leadership on our part and APATH and AEF to do that.
Well, and I think the business community needs to,
I
they
agree.
will weigh in heavily, because if the mill levy does go up, or our ability to ask for a mill levy does go up, they carry the bigger burden on that.
A longer-term finance issue which would impact voters, I think that this board hasn't addressed yet, and it may not be this board that does so, is our buildings, people have the perception over these many years that the district looks pretty good in terms of when you drive up there, a lot of new buildings, people, they seem to be in pretty good repair. But, we've forced our district administration to put together a long-term facilities management plan. And, there's some very big ticket items, boilers, things of that nature that come down the pike. Again, it seems like a long time from now, but it's only 5 or 6 years from now. For, $2-3 million here, $2-3 million there. At that point, the elementary school will be the oldest, the middle school is the newest, and the high school's in between those two. But you'll be into 20, in some cases, 20 years, 25 years of age on the older parts, and we don't have the deep pockets to accommodate for those large improvements, and we'll have to decide how we're going to address those as well. So that's a separate capital issue that I don't think really needs to be widely thought out beyond the board, but we've got to come up with a plan for financing that.
Other thoughts, questions, Steve?
How about bond issues, or how are you in terms of when they, you'll have things paid off on your construction?
As you know from some of the folks that you've talked to, been any bond issues you all have outstanding, it has been a wonderful ride with interest rates dropping and actively refinancing our debt. We are making very, very good headway towards reducing our debt load. It was always at a very high grade level in terms of debt, but at the same time, it's on a good trajectory. Let's just leave it at that without putting specific numbers out there. And a lot of it has to do with more of the bond monies being able to go towards principal rather than interest. So it may open up an avenue to go back into debt to maintain the facilities, but it's not something that we want to do lightly, and invariably it'll be right when interest rates are at their highest again, which is a difficult
What I was
position
thinking
to
is
be in.
if you could retire bonds, then theoretically you could take on that much debt again and continue paying the same amount.
Right. And a lot of it is just educating the community that those are the ebbs and flows of how a district works, but at the same time being financially responsible.
Rachel?
Yeah, I agree with you about convening as many players as possible and having more outside of the immediate school community having the discussion earlier on. And kind of along the lines of Steve's questions and others, it's going to be something that you just kind of lay everything out. And, I know that your financing is far more complicated than anyone else's that we ever work with or deal with, in terms of you're allowed to ask for this mill, but only for technology and transportation, and you're allowed to ask for this mill, but only for construction or something like that. But for the public to see how you're bound is going to be important, and that, if these are paid off, perhaps they could be renewed for operating, but perhaps not. And, I know that when we did have that kind of brief and foreshortened conversation about the sales tax being countywide before, it's something we would want to re-engage in. But I had questions to think, well, why aren't you also renewing that transportation and mill levy and technology? And it's like, well, we kind of let that one slide. It was only $460,000, but it's still a piece of the puzzle. But at least that was a way to spread it across the entire school district, as opposed to one entity or another, with the sales tax collection. And I think, those were difficult conversations before. There's probably no community out there that doesn't look at what they could do with their sales tax, or is it high enough, say in Snowmass's example, that it's going to push away business and make them less competitive and things like that. So, but I think that, really laying out that whole groundwork of this is the structure we have to work in, and seeing what people think, but it might be a combination of mills, and or even if you can extend a mill before it's expired, that once the construction bond's paid off, it will continue for this purpose, or things like that.
Yeah, I think we have to be really creative in our discussion with the community and try to find kind of the perfect balance. But I think also when we do that, we need to make sure that, and I know everybody thinks, oh, it's the schools that's important, but I think we're also important in the business community. I think we drive a lot of real estate values. I think we drive a lot of employers and employees being able to, who want to actually move here. I think we add value to the community other than, quote, just educating our children. I think we do a good job of educating our children, and I think people want to be here because we do that. And hopefully that, when we go back to the business community and go back to the community at large, that they'll agree with us on that.
Did you rank the #1 school district in the state, for outcomes?
We were at one point. Let's hope we can stay there.
I think one of the other pieces that goes hand in hand, something that you all constantly wrestle with over time, is growth in the community, population growth. And it goes hand in hand with finance, in my mind, as it relates to the school district, because we really don't have any place to logically expand beyond the one campus, and the second you go to a second campus, it changes a lot of dynamics. So, again, these are much longer range thoughts, but it's one that's of great concern, because if Pickton County is going to grow, then we need a place to put the students, and we're running up against constraints, particularly at the high school, more than anywhere.
So you stopped taking out-of-district students? Or?
We stopped that for a long time.
We stopped doing that many years ago before I was
so the final pool of them is really kind of coming up through the high school, the very last tail ends of those. So we really are, unless things change and population growth ends and heads the other direction, I don't see that happening, and I think that it will become something that is an issue and ends up being a financial issue as a result.
George?
So did you say, Bob, that the mill levy, you have to go before the voters by, it expires 2016?
The Aspen sales tax.
The sales tax expires 2016.
It sunsets in 2016.
Okay.
And I think, for the record, whoever's listening, I think it's important to remember that the prior board endorsed the Aspen Public Education Fund in moving forward for that vote, with the reservation that it was during a very difficult time financially for all districts, the financial crisis, and that in theory it had been thought of as a temporary measure, and that normal state finance would come back and backfill, and this wouldn't be something that would need to continue on forever. a couple of reflections on it is I think Aspen School District has certainly benefited dramatically. We wouldn't be able to continue the programs we have had we not had it. We would have had to made cuts, I believe. But at the same time, the state hasn't really truly backfilled. And here we are, 2-3 years later, soon to be 4 years later, and I don't really see any change. And so as we have those community discussions, it's no longer an emergency stopgap. You can't claim emergency forever. And so maybe this conversation changes to be more of a, we're going to take matters into our own hands and have it be a local funding discussion. It kind of morphs into that. And I don't want to go there without full conversation about it, because it is truly changing what originally was the intention of that fund.
I mean, it's interesting, over the last couple of weeks, the Aspen Institute hosted their annual governors groups, and whether it was the Republicans or the Democrats, one of the #1 issues that all the governors seemed to agree with was the need to provide for quality education. And certainly Governor Hickenlooper has voiced that over and over again as that leads to a strong economy for the state as well. So maybe there will be some movement in the legislation this coming year to look at allowing school districts individually to determine their own mill levies versus having that set by the state or restricted by the state.
When Sandra and I had our most recent discussion with Millie Hamner, she led us to believe that discussion was going to come up. It was going to come up at some cost to the school district. In other words, if the school district did use an additional mill levy, perhaps, and I'm just picking numbers out there, maybe, 20 cents on a dollar, 25 cents on a dollar, or whatever it is, of your state finance might go away. So, it's a balancing act for them. They have to worry about the districts that aren't able to find local funding, and they have to try to make it a fair and equitable funding solution. At the same time, school finance is eating up such a huge part of the state budget that there are, quote, no more dollars for school districts, and that's basically what Millie told us is, there'll be an incremental increase every year, but it won't be enough to keep up with your cost of living. And I think for us, we have two solutions. We can either reduce our services and reduce the quality of the product we're producing, or we can find a local funding source. And I think for everybody on this board, we'd much rather see if we could ask our voters for a local funding source than we would be to reduce the product that we're producing. And I think we're being judicious with our dollars, and at the same time that we are striving to be one of the best school districts in the country. So, we're back to the balancing act again.
And it was interesting, we just concluded, this is our second day of off-site meetings, ending with this meeting. And we had the head of the Colorado Association of School Boards helping us moderate some of our policy changes. And he brought to the table something that I really didn't fully appreciate until he said it on money. About 10 years ago, it was my understanding before my time, that we actually were paying more than anyone else in the state for new entry teachers. Mm. We know now that we're at best equal for new entry teachers, but that the state of Colorado is one of an ugly list of 4 or 5 that are the lowest in the nation for paying starting teachers. And it's actually, whether you're in Boulder or you're Aspen, Denver, wherever, we're actually really struggling to find teachers who are willing to move, not just to Aspen, but to Colorado in general, because of the low starting pay.
Yeah.
And
it's a major issue for us, especially up here.
I mean, one of the points he made were people who lived on the eastern side of Colorado actually driving to the neighboring state because Kansas. They could make Kansas, and you did say Kansas, make $20,000 a year more just by driving across the border. that's where we are with our school finance.
Or that's the impact of the deficit in school finance for these many years, statewide.
Steve? Do you have a good working relationship with Millie Hamner at the state legislature? Because she's a
Yeah, she's on
former
the
school
head of the education
superintendent
committee,
and
right?
very knowledgeable and a very strong advocate for, school finance, supporting it, not reforming it and doing away with it like some school finance reform things seem to be, to cut as much out of the budget as possible, but she's definitely on the other side.
I think we have a good relationship with Millie. Sandra and I both have spent quite a bit of time with her, and we try to see her at least twice a year maybe, and sometimes more often.
I mean, what's unique is, as a local, you are focusing on your local district. And when you start moving up the food chain of representation, you're having to represent a broader set of people, and things become a little bit more gray in terms of, solutions. And you have to be more equitable in the solutions that you propose. So, we're adamantly focused on our local issue here from a finance standpoint, and we'll continue to advocate for that. And it is quite different, to be very honest with you, from the representative district that Millie takes care of. Our issues are fairly unique compared to the state average.
And the reform of the school finance bill that was proposed last year would actually have been very bad for, I think it would have been good for the state of Colorado, but it would have been very bad for us.
I remember the publicity.
So
around
it's, it was one of those cases where it just put us in an untenable position, frankly, because you don't want to be the one that's holding up progress, but at the same time, if it's at the detriment to our children, that's kind of a hard pill to swallow. So I think moving forward, hopefully, there will be reform that will be not as large as that one was. The bill won't be as large as that one was, and it'll be a little more incremental and maybe a little more fair across the board.
What's interesting is I wouldn't call it a consortium, but there's a group of school districts around the state in different representatives' districts that share some of the similarities, the unique attributes that we have. And what I think we've found, at least through our CFO, is that it's worth bonding together with those to find those common things that we can fight for or bring to the table and have people understand. Because you can't always make headway as an individual district. And
Exactly.
Oftentimes Aspen, the name Aspen, when you're comparing it against La Junta, is a very difficult, it's a sharp contrast, and you don't always get the traction you'd like. So.
Rachel?
Yeah, no, just to comment on things we've already talked about, but, the Lobato case was decided that no, the state was not unfairly funding in schools, but I understand there's some other case that's working its way through that might have a little more teeth to it. I had personally hoped that perhaps Lobato would be a tool to overturn Tabor, which is part of the real problem for the state and everything else, when you have a representative government but you don't have the ability to actually fund the issues that you're trying to do. But so that's part of their dilemma, is, well, maybe they could let us have a higher mill levy cap, but only if some money helps keep everyone from getting too far apart on that scale, or you'll be violating the state constitution. But I would say just 2-3 weeks ago, I was over at Club 20, Western 20 Counties organization, and they have an education subcommittee, and I was listening to that, and I understand the attitudes you guys are dealing with out there. There were so many people who said, well, back in my Catholic school, if we just had corporal punishment again, the kids really listen, and that when kids want to, pay attention, and it's the parents' fault, and if the parents were more involved, it wouldn't take more money, and we've been throwing more money at this. I mean, whether half-truths and misperceptions. It's like, obviously, we've not been throwing more money at this problem for a long time or statewide, but, there is that resistance that's out there, unfortunately, in the state, and everyone seems to want to see everything funded for free anymore, and that's whether it's roads or whatever. Club 20 did their own survey of members, really briefly, about transportation, and their members said, yeah, we would support, at a 65% level, an increase in the gasoline tax, which matches for transportation. You take that to the Front Range and they'll tell you, oh no, no one will take more gasoline tax, it has to be sales tax. So everyone is still looking to increase sales tax for some need, as opposed to mill levies or as opposed to their own user fee, and it's getting absurd. But if you get down there, everyone's still feeling the recession that swept so much money out of the Department of Local Affairs and all the mineral impacted budgets. Those guys easily got shorted $200 or $300 million that is not going to come back to their fund that was swept for the state. So a lot of empathy. And I would still look at maybe pursuing that, being able to sell your cottages to teachers with a resale agreement, but that might give you some real funds back on money you've already spent.
When you refer to cottages, Rachel,
You're
are you
talking
just talking about our
housing?
employee housing
Yeah.
stock?
Yeah. Keep some for rental, try selling a few, but, that's how the city has financed almost all of its housing that it has for its employees, was build it, sell it, pull the money back out, mandatory resale back to an employee, and use the money for something else, whether it's operating or additional housing.
Did they have a move, but they don't have a move-out provision if you...
Yeah, after 1 year. 1 year of leaving the city employment, you're gone, whether you've retired or whatever. And they, got it built with the hopes, as you have, that then people would move into the broader lottery once they had a secure place to stay for a while.
Yeah, one of the things I think we want to work on with regard to move-out is maybe if we can do some education and help with, here's how you go from rental housing to owned housing. I think what we want to do is try to do some education and provide some assistance around that and see if that might work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people, when they first come to the district, don't have the money for a down payment. I mean, they just don't.
Sure.
And even as a district, we all know from the downturn that making 100% loans doesn't really work.
Next on our topic ideas was the impacts of retail marijuana within the school districts. Is there anything to report on how students are responding to the fact that marijuana is legal in a retail sense?
I don't think we have any hard data yet. I can tell you that we look at social norming in the high school and in the school, and what's normal for a lot of times. Kids' perception of what everybody else is doing will impact what they're doing. And I do believe that since marijuana has been legalized in the state, that our children think it's, not a lot of our kids think it's not a big deal anymore. And we know that the research, number one, that there is out there doesn't back that up on the developing brain. I think this is a question we're going to be struggling with for some time to come.
I think we have an active monitoring that has been there prior to this legislation and continues on, and I believe is well-funded. Sandra, help me out here. That's a reasonably well-funded organization, right? Partnership for Drug.
Partnership? No, it's not reasonably well-funded.
It isn't, okay. Well, they are the monitoring device that we, as a board, receive information from to determine how our
Yes, we do a
school
large
district.
survey of the kids once a year from a large survey company, and some of the questions revolve around attitudes towards alcohol and drugs and marijuana.
And we will do that again in the spring, and we'll have more data then. But, you can listen to National Public Radio and find out that from a statewide standpoint, it's becoming more of a social norm, and that's not good for our kids. And then, you've got the backlash too of things that you don't even think about, like our kids when they go on ex-ed or outdoor ed, used to be, you could bring your food along and, it would be no big deal. Now we have to worry about edibles and how those, might get introduced into the school system, and whether or not, those gummy bears that you're bringing are real gummy bears or those pot gummy bears. So it's a little bit further reaching than you think about, are our kids smoking dope? Well, they may not be smoking dope, but they may be, having edibles. So, and it makes it hard to look at, is it okay to bring cupcakes to school anymore? Those are the kind of issues that we have to deal with.
Steve?
A lot of the state tax money from the marijuana sales is supposed to be geared towards education.
It goes
Have
to
you
the
gotten
mayor.
any, do you get any funding at this point yet from the state, or is there any talk that you'll be receiving some assistance
We will
through the
not
state?
get any of that because it's earmarked solely for building schools. So if we build a school, and I think, I don't even think you can do long-term maintenance with it. I think it's school construction.
Yeah, the best
So-
grant. It's funding the best grant.
It's the best grant. So we won't see any of that unless we have to unless we have to build another school. And our experience with the community school, who is our charter school, they had a very difficult time even getting a best grant because the location of the school, the perception was it was in Aspen, so why are we funding an Aspen school? And it took them 3 years and actually an appeal.
And 2 applications.
Yeah.
So is money that's going into the BEST grant funding system, or that was previously going into the BEST grant funding system, is it being diverted elsewhere? Is there any extra money in the pool from marijuana taxes that are going across the state? So this is a big kind of myth in the world of marijuana's being able to.
Well,
I'm trying to understand.
Yeah.
Maybe not a
Two
myth, but
things. They're way under the retail sales that they thought they would be for collections. And more people are staying with medical as opposed to going to retail because of the tax burden.
Yeah.
Taxes are so much lower. So that seems to be the expectations, and the projections were just kind of wildly off.
But if you think front range, if you just think of need for school replacement,
Yeah.
and you think of any one of our 3 schools up there costing $30 million.
Yeah.
And there's only
one school a
$120
year.
million or whatever it is in tax collections. It's not yet a significant, it seems to me like it's not yet a significant amount of money.
Well, and it's only the first 40 million a year
Yeah.
that's earmarked for school construction. And, and we shouldn't, I'm not making fun of that, because that's a great source of funds for people who are building schools. But it doesn't help with your day-to-day operations for those of us who have established schools and right now don't have any plans to build one, unfortunately. Although that may be coming on our horizon.
I do understand that there are several communities, municipalities, and areas that are putting ballot initiatives on for additional sales tax for marijuana. I think Gunnison County is one of them, that they're looking at local tax, which of course would take a ballot measure for that. And I'd be curious to get more information, Phyllis, on what's happening with the taxing of marijuana on a state level and within local governments around the state of Colorado. Not that we need to make any change. I'm just trying to be informed, because I get asked this question a lot.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Where's the tax money going? What? And I, until now, I didn't really know the answer as, to the level that you would explained it, that it's those money for building or replacing schools. So, Rachel.
Yeah, I knew there were no money going to be available for operating or anything like that. I kind of thought at first Steve was alluding to, from the revenues, is there any more money for education programs that will flow to districts or to prevention, intervention, education along?
And that's where I think some of that
That's
smaller tax
what
money,
I was
smaller
wondering.
tax levies are being put
It's really
towards.
both.
Yeah,
They
it's supposed to
both
fund
are
both.
applicable to
Right.
education, the building and the drug education.
Well, it's my understanding that after the $40 million, there are dollars that go in for drug education. Whether or not our school district can access some of those. Now, that's a good question to ask, and I frankly don't know the answer to that.
Right.
But if we could access some of those funds for our own local drug education, that would be, I'm sure they wouldn't be hugely significant, but every little bit helps.
And yet I would say, as an advocate for what the district is doing, I think we're doing a very good job with the resources we have to educate our students about making good, healthy decisions. We have it in policy, and we have it in action in the classroom. Could there always be more? Absolutely. Could we have parental and community reinforcement of those policies and values? That could also be helpful. So.
Is there any other topics that people wanted to bring up? Either boards?
Hear from you guys, anything you wanted to bring up.
You know, I think you guys had a very comprehensive agenda from our viewpoint. I think our biggest pressing needs are housing and finance. And those are, the housing I think we put on the back burner because the finance is much more critical right now. It'll be interesting to hear what we hear from the community. We may come back to you guys and say, you know what, the community wants a sales tax, and they say it should be countywide. What do you think about that? I don't know what we're going to learn, but I'm sure we're going to want to come back and talk to you about it when we find out what we find out.
Rachel, there was a whisper that you had an interest in talking about transportation. And
I don't think I was the one who raised that. I think it was Steve,
All right.
actually, about the roundabout.
The only comment that I think we have collectively about that is that we understand that the school is a contributor, and we understand that there are times in the day when we don't actually really help things. We are adamant about proactively trying to mitigate that problem within our district, but our observation is that it's more than the school district. And we are open to having any dialogue you would want to have about that in common as you guys move forward with potential solutions. It's a problem.
I see that traffic problem occasionally. George and I both ride the RAFTA buses, and when somebody wants to stop at the roundabout, then the RAFTA buses pull into that area off to the right of Maroon Creek Road.
Yeah.
Then if there's a lot of traffic, number one, they have trouble even getting back on the Maroon Creek Road and getting through the roundabout because the cars will be stacked up there.
Yeah.
And that it's, you know, even it just slows down the
Everything.
the RAFTA thing. So.
But our school buses are full in the morning.
Yeah.
And we do something that most districts don't do. In the afternoon, we will pick up a child in one place in the morning and take them somewhere different in the afternoon for after-school activities. And most school districts do not do that. So we, you know, and we encourage our children to ride the bus. And we give away prizes if you ride the bus. And we give away prizes if you ride your bike to school every day. And, you know, we are proactive about that. But there are just some people who are not going to put their child on a bus. And that's not a lot we can do about that.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably some innovative solutions that don't require major road changes and things of that nature, but you know, they have to be well coordinated.
I think, you know, it's partly just a behavioral change that would be required. The parents are used to partly being helicopter parents and delivering their kids to school instead of having them walk or ride a bicycle or go on a school bus or on the public transportation.
I mean, as we said, the school buses are full in the morning. And it isn't just juniors and seniors driving to school, because that's really at most 100 cars, and 100 cars could process through that roundabout pretty easily if they're all going in the same direction on the way to school. You know, my belief is there's a lot more than 100 cars going there, whether it's skiers or whether it's moms bringing their kids to school. And I said to the ladies today at lunch, you know, there are these influences you're not always sure about. How do you know that 30% of the school district isn't from divorced families, and they're splitting tax. I mean, you just don't know why somebody isn't deciding to be more green, or trying to make it happen. You really don't know until you really delve into all the complexities of it. And people make rational, I believe people make rational economic decisions, and if you're coming into town anyway from Snowmass Village at 8 o'clock and you can drop your kid off and spend some quality time with them, you might do it.
Yeah.
Actually, I've even heard that. One of the architects in town drives his kids from Basalt, and he says it's my quality time with my kid.
Yeah, that's, I guess, one thought that we had when we talked briefly about that before was if there were a place, a drop-off point where the parents could drop, they get to take their kid.
We're all on the same page.
They drop them off, and then
Yeah.
a school bus swings
Yeah.
by there, and the last mile, the school bus takes them. That would be a potential solution to part of that.
You know, Rachel, to address this issue, it is still my belief that it's a larger, comprehensive solution where these little individual issues end up being part of a much larger transportation solution in the Upper Valley.
I mean, when Steve brought it up to the agenda, I said that, I know these guys are doing what they can with the campus, and that we've been up way back when Margot Pendleton was on city council to say, could there be a drop-off point by the Forest Service and try to end that. But the real problem is you have a half of a transportation solution created.
Right.
And you have the roundabout and then not the other components. I mean, the buses themselves get thrown right into mixed traffic right there.
Yeah.
Whether it was the approved light rail corridor or whether it would be the record of decision alternative with realigned highway lanes, we only have half of the solution there, and that will back up until the rest of the pressure's relieved.
Yeah. So we're happy to stay in the dialogue with you on. We just know that we're doing our best, and we're very cognizant of the issue. So,
How's the football team going to be this year?
no, I'm not.
We've got a brand new coach. We're
I know.
hoping it's going to be great. The boys started working out on Monday.
Yeah.
And I know they were all excited about it because I ran into a couple of them. So, and it's fun to go. I don't know whether you guys go or not, but Friday nights are very fun when we have home games. And it really does bring the small town atmosphere back, and it makes you understand kind of who you are and where you came from, as we say in the South.
It used to be, I'm a graduate of Basalt High School, and it used to be the only Aspen high school football games I would go to, I'd be in a Basalt uniform playing.
Well, we'll forgive you that. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for
Thanks
coming.
for the dialogue.
Thank
We
you.
really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions or needs further information, you can contact any of us, and our contact information is on our website.
And I would say just the sooner you start those community dialogues, the better, and be sure to give us an invitation. We'll make sure we have someone who can participate.
Perfect.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Good. Enjoy your week.
Next, got a couple of open discussion.
We have no MOIs today, correct?
No MOIs, some open discussion. One is board letter. Is John going to come down, or?
I emailed John. I don't know how long you think that is. The applicant can be here in 10 minutes or so, once we tell him to come. So,
Let's tell him to come and take another 10-minute break,
And then do the open discussions afterwards.
and then do the open discussions afterwards.
Sure.
So we don't get into
Let Healy
something.
know to come down too. We can always,
Yeah.
we can always walk back upstairs.
Okay. So we're on break.
Yes, on break till 2:45. Welcome back. This is the regular meeting Tuesday, August 12, 2014, Board of County Commissioners work session, not the regular meeting, I think I just said it's a work session. And we've got a few moments before we have consideration of a historic site application, pre-op type discussion with Lance, but John Ely is here to discuss the possibility of a letter as one of our open discussion items.
Right. Thanks, Rob. And with me, of course, is Laura Maker. And I'm not quite sure where to go with it. The state water plan is a document that has been requested and directed by Governor Hickenlooper to the CWCB, the Colorado Water Conservation Board. The Colorado Water Conservation Board is charged with the duty of producing a draft document by December of this year and a final by December of next year. In conjunction with that, the CWCB has hired through local agencies a variety of different consultants to work within each of the state's basins and with the particular roundtables within those basins to try to come up with an implementation plan for the state's overall water plan. What would the basins want to see happen to implement the water plan as a consequence of this? And so there is a draft basin implementation plan, a BIP, that was produced by the consultant for our basins, Schweizer Gordon Meyer, and has been circulated now for review. The document, though, is it's like this format of about 130 pages or so. So it's kind of difficult to disseminate, but the operative text can be reduced down to about 7 pages of a grid on each page, and of that, the only real items to key in on are these at the bottom of the page. So I have those if the board wants to see that now. And from there, the roundtable for our basin is meeting again or next in Glenwood Springs on the Thursday? No, that doesn't sound right. August 21st, I believe, is the date, but that comes...
August 25th is when the 1177 will be meeting.
25th.
The 21st is when the interim water committee will be taking public testimony.
That's over at the Water Congress. And so the idea being is that we would submit a letter to at least the Basin Roundtable for consideration and incorporation before the Basin Implementation Plan is finalized and sent on its way. The interim water committee, I believe, is talking only legislation. Is that correct, Rachel? Is that your understanding? Or are they talking about the plan itself?
No. When the legislature in last session passed a bill that was a compromise, that they would have public hearings on the state water plan.
Right.
Okay, instead of them having a vote to up or down it.
That's right.
And so, when I brought it up during our open discussion comments, my thought was that it's an opportunity for us to do public comment. I'm sure to have to be brief, but perhaps emphasizing what we disagree with in some of the other basin plans that are their solution is to come to the Roaring Fork and the frying pan for more water. And so I think it's more about making sure we have some prepared comments that respond to the other basin implementation plans that implicate us. Certainly if there's things that we would like to reinforce about our own basin implementation plan, that would be great, but it seems like the chance to put things on the record for our legislators. And just a small correction, this plan has already been submitted to the state by the state deadline.
Right.
We will be able to potentially, if the group agrees, modify it up until next April, but it has been submitted.
Oh, okay. I thought I knew the submission had occurred, but I thought the modification was sooner than April. I thought it was before the draft of the water plan in December. So.
Yeah, I really don't know how they have all these moving target dates, but all the basin's implementation plans should be on the CWCB website now. And so I was kind of concerned about, again, less so our basin and more so what other basins' plans are for us. And that's a chance to comment on that, how it would interfere with our both our basic plan, but also our resort economy and the national environment.
Well, to that end, let me,
So then, John or Rachel, so then we would not be sending a letter to our roundtable, the 1170 roundtable, we'd be sending it on to,
Well, on the 21st, either reading it out loud into the public record or submitting it to the record as a longer document and then making a few shorter spoken comments on the 21st. I mean, I honestly can't tell you what meaning this will have at the state legislature. You very well could see a new bill this coming session to say the state legislature does have to approve the state water plan, you know, or what, you know, whether it's just a listening crew. And there'll be all different people on the interim water committee a year or two from now, but it's about creating the record of concerns.
so, to that end, though, let me hand this out to the board. It's a list of water rights that Laura prepared for the County Healthy Rivers and Stream Board, and it sort of shows what's at risk, I think. These are a list of the conditional water rights associated with the Independence Pass project and the Frying Pan Arkansas Fryer project, and more than likely additional water to be exported from our basin someplace else is already described and described right there. The filing of an additional water right would be incredibly junior. The ability to perfect these is a much easier path than to try to develop a new right. Acquiring existing rights through the elimination of a consumptive use in our county is not quite so probable in that the cost of real estate and water here is exorbitant as compared to other places. So the perfection of these conditional water rights really probably is what we're at risk for in the most concise and immediate way. The rights associated with the Fryark project essentially are the north side collection system. With the exception of one collection point which is already in place and functioning, the entire north side has not yet been built. Independence Pass, or Twin Lakes, and most people refer to it as, has a number of significant conditional water rights associated with both the New York Collection Canal and the diversion dam. And the diversion dam is just to the south of Lost Man Reservoir. Sometimes people miss that because it's just kind of off into the trees. At any rate, so perhaps this is a good way to refer to what exactly we're talking about. And if the stream flows certainly in Upper Roaring Fork are depleted to that extent because of additional storage capacity or additional transmission capacity or any other reason, or because of dry up, for example, of agricultural land further to the west to alleviate calls either in-state, say, associated with Cameo, or out-of-state associated with the potential compact call, then those conditional water rights, I would think, would be next in line for withdrawal and would be the most immediately impacted. The implementation of the north side collection system at the Fryark would basically make north side look a lot like the south side. There are already bypass requirements incorporated in the north side as similar with the south side as part of the Fryark operation plan that's federally legislated. You know, there will be water bypass from the collection system. There will be significant depletions from the collection points, but a rebound, and then of course those streams flow into the frying pan and then ultimately to Rudai, and then below Rudai there wouldn't be any noticeable difference from the implementation of the north side collection system. The difference would be to stream health above Rudai. So that's an interesting list of water rights at any rate. Laura did that basically to sort of put some numbers associated with the sort of abstract fear that what would happen should the dynamic change and so forth like that. So How would the board like to proceed on discussion of a communication such as Rachel just described? I mean, like I said, we can walk through the draft BIP points, discussion points, and perhaps key on a few of those things, or we can...
It seemed like Rachel was more concerned with walking through the other basins
The
plans
other BIPs, right.
and
going
allocating
through that.
resources to determining what impact various recommendations might have to our basin. And it's a resource question, I think, to some extent between now and then on you know, your office and
Oh, we can get it out. I'm not worried about that.
figuring out how to isolate where those other plans reference either these water rights or reference other grabs that might happen in this basin.
Yeah, the, you know, watershed management plan that was finalized through Rudai Water and Power Authority had a chapter about the conditional water rights and additional takes, and I think the rough estimation was that if they were all perfected, it would be another 20% take out of the Roaring Fork and the Frying Pan, and that, you know, we're already about a little under 40% depleted of our native flows. This would take us to about 60% depleted of our native flows. You know, we could also check back and talk about further tomorrow at the end of our regular meeting, but because of the bike race, we don't have a Tuesday meeting next week, so we'll get a little short on time. And I think that, you know, there's been a lot of talk at the IBCC level. You know, the IPPs, I've mentioned to you guys before, identified projects and processes almost have a halo effect, like they're already a done deal. And so I think insisting on the appropriate mitigations that, you know, there's discussion that any new project should benefit both sides equally, or both communities. I would think we should stress the challenges we're already having hitting our minimum stream flows, and how will these projects address helping hit minimum stream flows in the upper Roaring Fork. You know, I don't know how far we can go, quote, with requests, because they're the IPPs and they're conditional water rights. And if these were perfected, they would get the date of the original filing for the conditional. So many of these might actually be senior to minimum stream flows. I'm not sure about that, but some may be. And so, you know, just the protesting that we really don't want to see future water needs drying up our streams, you know, that they will be able to sweep the river below minimum stream flow, and that's just unacceptable.
Well, I guess I wouldn't focus so much on the minimum stream flow, because I hate accepting that term, because to me it's a
More on a healthy
canard
river.
anyway. It doesn't mean anything. It's not like a scientifically based, this is a healthy river amount of water running through it. But perhaps the you know, the concern at many different levels in jurisdictions all over the state, and well, particularly with the West Slope, is a reduction of 1041 review powers. Perhaps as a reversal of that fear that we request that 1041 review powers be enhanced and encouraged at the state level, in order to allow local governments the ability to exercise appropriate mitigation measures, so as not to overly impact the host community or the sending basin, that type of thing. The other suggestion I could make is that compact compliance. In fact, there's disturbing comments actually in our own basin implementation plan about that. It seems to refer to a West Slope obligation. I think the compact compliance for the Colorado River should be seen as a statewide obligation. It's a statewide compact.
Yeah.
It obligates the state. It doesn't obligate the Roaring Fork Valley or any part of the state in particular. And so that the development of any new water supplies, regardless of, I suppose, which way they're flowing, but certainly the ones that are going, any new TMD or enhancement or of existing TMD, like these conditional water rights that we were just talking about, are not a new Trans Mountain diversion, but represent just an enhancement or an improvement of the collection system associated with an existing Trans Mountain diversion. At any rate, such that any new diversion or the enhancement of an existing diversion system must be responsible for the state's compact compliance to the extent of its consumable use, or whatever its inherent consumption is of that water resource. And the essence of that being that water that is consumed on the west slope is never 100% consumed. There is a return flow, whether return flow is coming out of a sewage treatment plant or off of a tail run of an irrigation ditch. It's never fully consumed here, and it continues to benefit the stream and provide compact compliance as it goes west. Whereas water that is exported across the mountain, across the divide, is gone 100% and never comes back one way or the other, such that if there is a responsibility for compact compliance, it should be borne commensurate with the amount of your consumptive use. And if you're consuming 40,000 acre feet, 100%, then that's where that pain should be felt, as opposed to an irrigator or a municipal system over here that is not consuming 100% of their water resource.
I would agree that that's a very strong point to make.
Michael?
Who's proposing an argument that's different from
You know, it's not so much an argument that's different, but it seems to be an issue that's embedded in everything. For example, even our own BIP, it talks about the West Slope's obligation for stream flow. There is no West Slope obligation for stream flow. It's a compact compliance, and that's all there is. And to think of it as in terms of West Slope or Front Range is, to me, is a fallacy. It's a state obligation. When the compact obligation, the compact call comes on, the first location for relief that is discussed frequently is agricultural dry up, either permanently or temporarily, or some mechanism through a water bank or some other institutionalized methodology that would allow for water to continue to flow west from dried up farms and fields in the West Slope to hopefully satisfy the compact compliance, so that Front Range Trans-Mountain diversion can continue apace, rather than sharing the burden of that compact compliance. And quite frankly, it would seem that that burden should be more heavily borne by consumptive uses that are exporting that water out of the basin, such that there is no return flow, there's no continued benefit into the stream.
So your suggestion, John, to make that argument that seems to be implicit in these documents, an explicit argument on our behalf.
Right. And I suppose what you're arguing essentially for is a recognition. That's how trans-mountain diversions should be accommodated and administered, such that the obligation of compact call should not fall unduly on the West Slope. It should fall proportionate to the consumptive use of the water.
Well, who signed the compact? The state?
Yes.
So the Western Slope didn't sign the compact?
No, it's not a regionalized document.
Yeah. Right. The state has signed it. So it's a state obligation.
Felt by the basin that it directs water from.
Rachel?
Yeah, you know, I agree entirely with what I believe are your sentiments, Michael, but there's always the practicality and what really happens on the ground. And that's the concern, is that the River District and others have been talking about the concept of a water bank for years now, where you would pre-arrange with willing buyers and willing sellers to not irrigate that year, and they continue to pump their water. And that's just been very heavily focused on the West Slope of where we're going to be able to buy and fallow and buy the water. There has been a lot of emphasis that there would have to be water bank activity on the Front Range as well, and they would need to reduce their consumption by reducing their agricultural use at the same time. But the bigger point of percentages and ratio, I think, is what you really could hang your hat on more, very strongly. That's different from how they're looking at it now, of the percentage of the consumable water that's going eastward. But in all practicality, none of that water will ever be piped back this way. And if you're making up multiple year deficits, it can be incredibly problematic. And so it's just like what we're seeing with the compact now, where the compact was written in, or signed arguably in the 20s. Some people are now arguing over the date of the action, but it doesn't say how to deal with the shortages that we are now incurring from drought. And so there's been a lot of effort to come up with a contingency plan that really includes additional releases from Blue Mesa and additional releases from Flaming Gorge, even though they have nothing to do with the compact or existing law or anything like that. It's just how do we keep water and fire hydrants so there's not a human health risk. And I don't like to say it, but I've heard it way too many times from too many people that you put it on the ground and it's going to be people's needs first, and them stream flows, the environment, the endangered fish, they can just take a hike because they're not going to let people live without water in their fire hydrants, no matter whether it's here or California. So, you know, the other issues that are big to potentially talk about is the conservation element, you know, is that, you know, it's not the mean west slope saying you can't have more water. We got plenty over here, but you can't have any to the Front Range. We don't have any, and it's the Front Range that's not managing its growth. And if they want to prevent buy and dry, it's within their hands to do so, you know. But their techniques have been more about we need those bluegrass lawns to sell real estate, and we need more water from the western slope. And I think to point out that that attitude is not going to get us anywhere in the long run is the way to go. I mean, you look at what's happening all across California now, and people are being told by the government to just cut back by 20%, and then they're getting fined by their homeowners association for having a brown lawn.
So, Rob, we were scheduled at 3 o'clock to hear this morning.
Yeah.
So I think we
Yeah.
should take this up.
So I think we have some direction here in terms of getting something formatted to submit comments and a letter and those sorts of things. So,
Okay.
And we can check back in at the end of tomorrow as regular if need be.
Okay. Sounds good. And, and Laura will be at the...
Yeah, I'm going to be at the Water Congress.
At
so
the
I'll be
Water
at the-
Congress, and so,
Yeah, the hearing on the
Available to
21st is
the-
actually down in Beaumont Springs.
Yeah, the
Right,
Joint Committee. Yep.
Could I get the latest copy of the SGM?
Executive.
this is yeah, absolutely.
The basin implementation.
This is kind of a refined down version. It's
Yeah.
obviously.
I'm aware of that.
Excerpts.
I've got 5 different versions. I presume this is the latest version of this.
all right. Lance Clark is presenting our next agenda item, consideration of his, what's that?
I'm just kicking it off.
Oh, you're just kicking it off?
That's right.
Is Mike in a,
No, the
the
applicant,
applicant?
potential.
But Lance, I would like a little background
Sure.
on how this becomes a preview to an application.
I will.
It's a little bit of an unusual circumstance to have a preview before an application gets submitted.
Totally, and I will do that. And you and Steve are the only ones that haven't been through this with other historical projects. So this is not the first time. This is perhaps the third time that we've talked about Smuggler, and we've talked about a couple other projects throughout the county. But when we drafted the 2006 land use code, we had what we called the Owen Minnie provision. Owen Minnie was the owner of the Emma store and the single-family home adjacent to the Emma store. And he tried several different applications for redevelopment of those sites before the county ended up purchasing it, and without success, and ended up spending a lot of money going through application processes. And we encouraged him to do it again, and he said, well, I'm not going to go through another application and spend X amount more dollars without having some idea whether the Board of County Commissioners is even interested in what I'm proposing. So he suggested, and we ended up drafting a provision in the historical preservation portion of the land use code that is very unique. It allows someone who potentially has an application that affects a listed historic site or a site that could become listed to come before the board in an informal discussion to attempt to get some feedback from the board as to whether or not the application that might be proposed might have some kind of positive reception or might not have some kind of positive reception. And this is the only opportunity in Pitkin County Land Use Code to do it. It's when there's an historic site involved. And there is no obligation on the part of the board to give any direction. It's totally, whether or not the board feels that it's appropriate to give some feedback to help the potential applicant decide if they have a viable project. Very unique. No obligation to give direction to staff or to give direction to the applicant, but it's helpful to the applicant if there is some kind of discussion that might give them some idea whether or not they're headed in the right direction and want to go forward and make a land use application. We've talked about smuggler in this context before, several years ago. We now have another potential applicant for the Smuggler Mine property, and I'll let Patrick Raleigh, who represents the applicant and who works for Stan Clausen, to give you a presentation on what it is they're thinking about. But in essence, it's likely, and we don't know until an application is made, but it's very likely that this application would require some code amendments. The Smuggler Mine property is just slightly less than 30 acres, but the AR-10 zoning, 1 lot per 10 acres, requires 10-acre lots, which 3 lots cannot be achieved on a 29.7-acre property. So it's very likely that there would be code amendments proposed for historic resources to allow some kind of subdivision exemption for additional lots on less than what would typically be required. It's very likely there would be a code amendment involved regarding slopes. As you know, the Smuggler Mine 29-acre site is mostly very steep. We have a provision in our code that reduces density if the lot is very steep, and that would go into effect in this case, so it's likely there would be a request for a code amendment so that that provision could be modified for historic resources. It's very likely there'd be a request for growth management incentives for house size, meaning the houses would be larger than 5750 and would have growth management exemptions to exceed that, and there'd be a growth management exemption required for a second development right, for a second house. Because essentially what is being proposed, and this has come before you the last time you talked about this is a similar proposal. What's being proposed is that the 29.7 acres would be divided into 3 lots, 2 single-family home lots of 10 acres each, and then a 9.7 acre lot that would remain the Smuggler Mine, and there would be enhancements to that historic resource. And the enhancements to that historic resource would be the trade-off that the board would consider whether or not it was appropriate to grant some of these incentives that will be required for this development to take place.
Yeah, Michael?
So let's go back a little bit, Lance, to Owen Minnie. On his property, he had a number of significant historical structures. There was no necessity for him to preserve those structures whatsoever. He could let them deteriorate or tear them down. And so I think my recollection is that the county wanted to enter in discussions with him to give him some good direction in order to preserve those structures. And that's why this provision was in place. Because at the time we thought those structures were important, and they've turned out to be preserved and significant. So I just want to establish the basis for this conversation.
And the Smuggler Mine site is also a valuable historical site that I think everyone knows, is in need of enhancement, restoration, and there's also always been a desire that it have some public accessibility because of its value to the history of Pitkin County.
George?
Lance, were there prior approvals for this parcel, and if so, has the vesting expired?
No, there are none.
There are none what?
No, there's no approval of any kind for this 30-acre parcel. There was an application,
2007?
2007, there was an application that never went through completion.
Okay, thanks.
It was withdrawn.
It got withdrawn, it got really...
Submitted and withdrawn.
Got really messy.
It got caught up in the Great Recession.
That's all I need to know.
Rachel?
You seem to have referenced, though, that it already has the rights to one home site and needs to go through GMQS for a second. What
Yes,
is
there
the
would be.
one home site right derived from? Is there an existing residence?
It's an existing 30-acre lot that has no residence.
Okay, so unsubdivided at 30 acres, it has an existing underlying right for one.
Correct.
And then to subdivide, it would normally need 10 each.
Correct.
So without these sort of code changes and provisions, you could have two 15 or 14.9 acre lots, and that's it. And one, so it is,
And one would be the-
it's a request for upzoning at a certain level.
Yes, that's correct.
So, and typically, how do we proceed with this sort of
Typically,
thing? It's just the applicant giving a
The
presentation?
applicant gives a presentation for what their concept is for the redevelopment and historic preservation and the incentives that might be required. And then the board is free to discuss, give feedback as it sees fit.
Patrick, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for the
Introduce your
introduction.
team.
Yes, my name is Patrick Raleigh. For the record, I'm with Stan Clausen Associates. I'm joined here by the potential purchaser, Joe Crafton.
Hello?
And we'll review many of the things that you touched on, and please ask any questions. So as Lance indicated, this is a proposal or a potential two homes up to 15,000 square feet with a passive park that would be provided in conjunction with these two homes. We would propose a dedicated residential access and also a dedicated mine site access so that the two uses...
Patrick, it says private park up there, and you said park.
Passive private park. So it would be a park for the benefit of the two home sites with some possibility that that park would be open to visitors of the mine and for various special events and community activities that would be up there. Primarily it would be a private park, but it would potentially be open for additional use. It would be as opposed to, like, for instance, the Molly Gibson, which is a perfectly public park and you can go in at any time that you'd want. There would be some restrictions on use. So there would be two access points. We would be separating the mine from the residential portion of the site. We do request historic preservation of the mine site, or would request historic preservation of the mine site, and the incentives that come along with that preservation, and also with potential code amendments that would relate to the development of a second home site. We would perform a general cleanup, I think a very broad cleanup of the mine site to pick up the various materials that have accumulated up there over the years. There's various ramshackle structures and activities going on. There's junk cars. So we'd clean that up and improve the visual aesthetics of it. We would improve the mine facilities and also the mine tour experience for the visitors who are coming in to enjoy this rather unique experience of going and firsthand experiencing Aspen's history. And in connection with that mine site, we would be providing a visitor center, a watchman's quarters, which is required to ensure the safety of the site, of the mine site, and also improve the accessibility.
Can you describe what a watchman's quarter is?
A watchman's quarter would be a
Caretaker unit.
Well, yes, it's something similar to that. It would be a simple, we're not talking about a large house, a very simple rudimentary residential structure for the watchman to live in. Currently, there is a watchman's quarter up on site. It consists of an Airstream trailer that has been covered with some old wood. So we would be improving on that condition.
You can't improve on that.
He has satellite TV. He has satellite TV. So 72100 is the historic preservation aspect of the code, purpose and intent. And rather than going through all of these 5 points, I think the two applicable ones are 4 and 5, which is to safeguard the historic, architectural, and cultural resources that support tourism and the economic welfare of the community. I think it's rather obvious how the smuggler answers that criteria. And also to provide a mechanism to resolve conflict between the preservation of important historic resources and cultural landscapes and the growing pressure of development and alternative land uses. This is a very difficult site. Requires lots of cleanup, lots of monitoring. It's a delisted Superfund site. So this is a very unique site and in many ways a very difficult site to see some development on. But it also is also very important from a cultural historical aspect. The Smuggler Mine, I might add, was one of the wealthiest mines in the region, and the Aspen area was one of the, I think it was the wealthiest silver mining region in the world. Various things, superlatives have come out of the Smuggler Mine. The world's largest pure silver nugget was extracted, unfortunately, in 1894, a year after the silver panic. The criteria for designation of a historic preservation as contained in the code is, again, we'll hit on, I think, some of the more pertinent points. The importance of the historic theme to which the resource is related to the county's history. No doubt mining was a very significant aspect of the 19th century Pitkin County, and the smuggler preserves that very in an untouched setting in many ways. The qualities of singularity such as rarity, uniqueness, and age. No other opportunity to actually delve into the mining history by going through a tour and seeing the tunnels and the various workings. Its visual prominence, it sits very close to town. It's right off of the Smuggler Mountain Trail. Many people visit it and many people see it, and it should be preserved as such. And its role in community events and celebrations. It has been a prominent fixture in our community, and Joe would like to continue that and make it available to community activities and events.
And the last point, a notable individual and their contribution to the county, state, or nation. Obviously, Hyman owned the mine. 3 generations of Hymans owned the mine until the 70s and 80s. So it's.
So here are some of the existing conditions, and to orient you, Rob, I don't want to burn your eyeballs out. So, Mount Sopris is in the background. You can see the town below, the blue roofs of Centennial. This is the current access. Right off the picture is the access off of the Smuggler Mountain Road. There's a detention pond that has been located. This is the capped soils that have contamination, so all the soils have been located. This will be left undisturbed. Here's a large retaining wall that will also remain undisturbed. And you can see some various structures that have made their way to the smuggler site over the years. This is currently being used as various things.
It's a mechanic shop.
Auto repair and whatnot, and you see junk cars. And this is actually one of the capped entrances to the mine, and that has been capped, and that will be improved. This is dirt currently. The future condition, this will be landscaped and improved visually. Here's another view looking a little bit farther to the south and east. Again, here's the detention pond, and you can see Smuggler Mountain Road. So it is rather prominent for those who are traveling up the road for the hike. This is the wall that I mentioned earlier. Now, this is part of the capping. Part of the capping of the contaminated soils. And I insert this picture because rather than whitewashing over this history, of the site, of its mining site, of its mining activities, also as a Superfund site. We will look to try to incorporate some of these features into the new landscape that will be certainly beautified, but will still remain, some of these touchstones will remain for the visitors to appreciate the background history of the site. You can also see some of the overburden piles in the background, which will remain. And these are some of the structures that are located up at the current entrance to the mine, where mine tours begin. This is the mine. This is actually what is used as the exit for the tours. This would become the entrance in our proposal. And you can see that, we we like these. It's a raw site, and in many ways that's the attractiveness of it. But it also has some sites that features that need to be improved. So we would keep much of this existing rock, maybe do some improvements to the entrance with some new timbers, and cleaning up some of the retaining, and making this a higher quality visitor experience, but also keeping much of the mining aesthetic. This is our overall site. As Lance was talking about, we would propose 3 lots, 2 10 acres, and then the mine site, which would be 9.7 acres. To orient you, here's the Smuggler Mountain Road. It winds itself around and actually crosses up above where development would occur. We have the 2 residential sites. These are just conceptual footprints placed in there. They have no bearing on size. That hasn't been determined yet. But above this red line are the areas of steep slopes above 45%. But below the red line, we have areas of more gentle slopes of less than 30%, which are acceptable for development. Again, to orient you, here's the Silver Lode Drive and Williams Ranch. There are existing residential developments located right up to the boundary of the mine site. Here are the 2 entrances that I discussed. So this would be the dedicated residential entrance that would serve both home sites, and then you'd have a dedicated mine entrance to keep the activity of the mines separate. Let me go to the next image. Here's our rendered site plan. Sorry, it's a little bit difficult to see, but this has zoomed in to really where most of the activity would be occurring. So again, you have the 2 home sites with its dedicated road climbing. Significant vegetation would be added to try to minimize visual impacts to the neighboring residences. The two entrances. Here's the entrance to the mine, where we'd have a visitor center, watchman's quarters. So a combined building where one would go to purchase a ticket, for instance, park your car. And then there's various stair access that would gain the main mine plaza area adjacent to the mine entrance that I showed you earlier. In this stair access, we have concepts that, various points along the stairs would be interpretive signage, explaining various aspects of the mine, turning around, looking at Ajax Mountain, the city below, and getting up to the mine tour site. We would have a museum, gift shop, a very minor gift shop. We're not looking at this as a major money maker, but rather an opportunity for someone to, say, for instance, purchase a silver coin that was minted out of the silver that came out of the mine, which incidentally still exists. There's still quite a lot of silver in the mine. This was the private park that, Michael, you were discussing, or you asked about earlier. Again, it would be primarily for the 2 residential houses, but it would be made available to, on a case-by-case basis for the visitors to the tour site for community events, something like that. It would be slightly less than a public park. And then, of course, we'd have improved landscaping all around on the lower bench, replacing that image that you saw of the various junk cars and buildings scattered about. We have had story poles erected. These have built on that 2007 application that Lance referred to. Again, just mostly to give you an idea of where the home sites would be situated. They may not be the exact configuration of what the homes that we would propose would be, but it gives you an idea. And if you can see, if I can get my pointer to work, it's starting to go. There is a story pole in there. Thank you, Rob. So you can see that a potential house would not break the ridge line. It would be situated. Oh, great.
This one's out too?
Oh, great.
Oh, they're just using it this morning.
Rob, I'm going to have to call upon you.
Is there a mouse pad?
There is, but the mouse, can you see this mouse? Yeah, there we go. I can use the mouse. So you can see that the home sites would not break the ridge line. They're located on the areas of less steep slope and not present a major visual issue to people walking up the Smuggler Mountain Road. So in addition to standard benefits, which are afforded to historic properties, and Rachel, I would point out that 72100 F3E gives you a density bonus. So when you have a historic building or site, you have the ability to build one additional home. Because of the areas of steep slopes, we would be limited to our net lot area, and we would, we have these steep slopes, so we would request a code amendment for a historic resource that has steep slopes, the ability to build one more additional house or to be free of those steep slopes.
Again, it might be worth pointing out that the mine itself is on the National Register of Historic Places. It was designated in 1985. So what you look at when you look at the mine, the actual overburden, the pile of rubble that comes out of it is on the National Register. When they came during World War I, World War II, they salvaged all the physical things on the mine. So everything that you see, except for the rubble, is post 1940. So a lot of people think of a lot of that material is historic. Really, the mine, in effect, closed in 1918, and then they had a salvage company come salvage everything that was salvageable. And so the desire is to put it back to 1918, thereabouts, and remove some of the stuff from the 70s and 80s. But everything we do to really have an authentic feel, so there really is an authentic experience back to the map here on the wall from 1894, turned back to that time period. And so this is on the Register of National Historic Places, the piles of overburden.
Yeah, Rob?
Rachel?
Yeah, just to clarify, the density bonus is a potential bonus, and
Correct.
it's a discretionary action of the board. It's not an automatic.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, you kind of.
And that would also have a component of 51020. It's essentially the same code amendment. We would just be picking it up in a different section of the code. So the overview of the designation of the delisted Superfund site. Everybody asks questions. It's an EPA Superfund site. Oh my gosh, it's very scary. But the mine is located. The mine site itself, what we've been talking about, was located in what is known as Operational Unit 2. There's an Operational Unit 1 as well. It's the official name is the Smuggler Mountain Superfund Facility. So if I refer to the facility, that's what I'm referring to. OU1, interestingly enough, encompasses existing residential development. As I mentioned, the Silver Lode, the Williams Ranch, the Mobile Home Park, Centennial, Molly Gibson Park is all located in Operational Unit 1 of the facility. And so you have a facility that is 135 acres total, of which has already seen 116 of those acres developed. So really what we're doing is filling in the remaining amount of developable land, and really only in a very minimal way of these two home sites and the preservation of the mine site. Much of the area and steep slopes we would be willing to discuss with the board whether or not a conservation easement is acceptable or some other means to ensure that remains native. Lead and cadmium were the contaminants that were found in the soils. Those certainly do present potential health risks to humans, and those came from the tailings and the workings that were pushed down the hill and then were gradually mixed in with the other materials that were found at the bottom. But development must follow local, state, and federal guidelines before and after development. That is something that we are well aware of, and we would gladly comply with those, and we look forward to working with those agencies to ensure that this is a safe site. And most importantly, the facility was delisted in 1999, meaning that the operational controls, the monitoring, they found that it had progressed to the point that the risk was such that it could be delisted, and there is a protocol for future testing every 5 years. So it was removed from the CERCLA Superfund site list. Cleanup activities that have occurred out on the site exist primarily of the capping of contaminated soils, which was located in this area down here. This is the area that would be proposed for the park. That was capped with clean soils and vegetated to prevent erosion. There was regrading to ensure that the water drained back from the site. So you can see the detention pond that I referred to earlier captures any water, so there's no actually water running off the site. It all runs back towards the mountain. Dust emissions need to be controlled by spraying water, by spraying mag chloride on it. Of course, that will be minimized greatly if the site is redeveloped as we propose, because a lot of the vegetation will lock that in, and also will have
if I could add, yeah, it's challenging to have a lot that's dirt, keep this dust suppressed, but once you cover with sod, topsoil, and keep it irrigated, which there's a well on the property that should irrigate it, fine. Nothing better than keeping it moist and covered with sod to keep any kind of dust down, which I think would be a challenge even with the dust suppressant that they spray on it.
Though the existing mine operations have supposedly met these requirements moving in the past. And then finally a fence, which restricts access to the lower portions of the mine site, would remain, and we would likely try to improve that with a more pleasing appearing fence. But that would exist. And also, I might add, some other safety features would be added around the mine site. Currently, if you stand up at the mine portal, it's not far-fetched to imagine a child or someone falling off this overburdened pile. So some safety improvements would be made, and Joe will talk about that a little bit later. So, future activities. The EPA and the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment have determined that the facility poses no significant threat to the public health and environment as long as the institutional controls are enforced and maintained. And as I've said, we look forward to working with those agencies in making sure that those controls are maintained and enforced. Interviews with Tom Dunlap, the former Pitkin County Environmental Health Director, and Joanna Schaffner, the zoning officers, have said that they know of no development restrictions other than the stated controls that we've discussed. There is 2 ordinances. The city passed one and the county also passed one. County's is 9415, series of 1994-15. These requirements are much the same as we've discussed. Any disturbed soils or materials to be stored above ground must be contained and covered by a county-approved method, a tarp or something like that. We would work with county environmental health. The soil does not need to be removed once the home sites are excavated. You can contain the soil. You can contain the soils if they contain less than 1,000 parts per million of lead, or you could also find a satisfactory method to dispose of this. So if you have spoils that are coming out of your excavated sites, it's not necessary to truck it off-site. It can be handled appropriately, again, working with the appropriate agencies. If you do have trucking of these contaminated soils, they have to be transported to a site that is acceptable to receive these. Dust suppression, as we've discussed, needs to be instituted, but that would be minimized if development occurs. And I found this interesting to throw in. Everybody is worried about it, but you can grow vegetables and flowers up there as long as you have 12 inches of soil that has less than 1,000 parts per million of lead. And of course, landscaping that requires the disturbance of more than 1 cubic yard would require a permit. Again, not an issue. We would gladly comply. And I might also add that we have contracted with Environmental Services, Inc., an environmental expert, to provide some initial consulting work. And if we were to move forward, we would be working with this person who is very familiar with the mine to ensure that all the controls and requirements are met. So, the conclusion of the Superfund site significance. I think the site, it can be said that the development can occur per county regulations. it does not appear that development would initiate additional regulatory involvement of the state or federal agencies. The site inspections would be continued by the EPA in conformance with specified controls, and development proposals will work with the county and the EPA to review and ensure compliance with specific controls. So here I'll turn it over to Joe to discuss some of the mine operations briefly.
Right.
Or the mine tour.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm a retired marketing executive. I'm not a real estate developer. I'm not a geologist. I'm not a miner. But I am fascinated by history. I'm a bit of a history nut, and I love the opportunity this presents as far as creating a really quality visitor experience, something you'd be proud and feel secure taking your kids or visitors to go see. It only sees about 1,500 visitors a year, but I think there's a lot more potential once it's cleaned up and it presents itself in a quality manner that gives everybody comfort that it's well run. And culturally, we want to keep the same people doing the tour today. You know, Jay and Larry and Roger and the crew, they're great, and we've built a relationship with them, and I tend to keep them on as consultants and basically rock jocks that hang around and help bring the mine to life. But some of the things that could improve the authenticity and the accuracy, it can be a hands-on museum that shows the history of Aspen and mining activities. The history of Smuggler Mine, goes back to 1879, and it parallels with the history of Smuggler, of the town of Aspen. It had, at its peak, it had 12,000 residents in 1890, and after the mine closed, it went down at one point as low as 700. So it's really fascinating to look at the growth of Aspen and the growth of the mine and the price of silver and some things you could do to bring that alive. And also to actually let them do a hands-on touch or look at the safe, pick up a silver ingot, possibly have a silversmith there that would mint 999 proof silver from Aspen, possibly maybe the one-day earrings, but nothing major, just more of like a Colonial Williamsburg experience where you see a craftsman working. An observation deck has some of the best views in town with high-quality binoculars. So that's an example of the fun and interactive things you can do. And from a quality Smithsonian-type experience, you'll show the day in the life of a miner. What were their wages? What was their workday like? What kind of equipment were they given? What was the safety like? There were probably 40 people, from what I could tell, that died at the mine. A little shrine and little remembrance of them and how dangerous it was, but also some of the things that silver's used for. It's used in computers, it's used in photography, and an appreciation that mining has a proud history. And then some of the great mystery in the legends that go with the mine, and then the importance of it to the county, and then what does today's mining look like, which is different than it was back in the 1800s.
And I would point out this is an interesting image of the stoops that descend Smuggler Mountain.
Yeah,
to understand the extensiveness.
Supposedly there's 30 miles of tunnels, half of it underwater. So things that I could do just if I look at it from a customer's perspective, a visitor, the entrance and the exit should be reversed because the exit's really tall, the entrance is really short. Well, it's more inviting to come into a tall place and then walk toward the light on the way in. LED is a game changer. If you've had any experience with LED lighting, it's cheap, it's efficient, and it lights up the world. And instead of a bulb every 20 feet that's a 40-watt bulb, you could really light that thing up and allow people to see specimens on the wall and feel more secure. Shorten the tour, put in more reinforcement. There's some janky-looking beams in there that may be secure, but they don't feel secure to the average person. More handrails, and have a camera that films people going in and out, so we make sure we have 12 people going in and 12 people coming out. And then oxygen meters, as opposed to having one just on the hip of the tour guide, have them throughout the mine so that if the oxygen drops, everybody that's on the tour can hear the alarm. Things like that that can make it just a better experience all the way around. Without destroying the integrity, it can make it even more authentic, I think, with that. The next slide, if you would. And I think that's it. I think from a community asset, my desire is to not to make money on the mine, but to have something that would be continually reinvested. So as money comes in from tourism, reinvest it in creating the museum to be more like a Smithsonian experience where you have authentic materials that you can buy today on eBay and from people who have authentic maps and so forth, but it costs money. And the way to do that is to create a better experience for the visitor.
So in summation, the advantages for allowing redevelopment, we'd obviously be preserving a historic resource, very important to the community. We'd be protecting rural areas and ensuring that density remained within the UGB and keeping rural areas rural. Improved visual aspects from the Smuggler Mountain Road, I think, would be very helpful. Areas of steep slopes would be conserved. Creation of important community resources, a resource that could also be leveraged by community groups, and Joe is very interested in doing that. And finally, and maybe most importantly, there would be a stable and predictable management of the mine site for the future. Joe is interested in maintaining this mine within the family. He has family members that are interested.
Yeah, if I can build on that.
Takes a lot of questions out.
Yeah, this will be my second home. This is not an investment so much as it's where I would want to live. So I'd be closely identified to be a family business. And with 3 sons that are teenage and 22, up to 22, it'd be great to have it be a family business. We'd like to keep it that way. So it's a long-term thing for me, and it's going to require a lot of investment on the front end to make it something that we'd all be proud of. But I'm prepared to do that.
And with that, that's the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, we'd be glad to answer them.
Michael?
So there's, say on Google Earth here, there's tailings to the east that you didn't discuss. Are those on the property?
No, in fact, the property is, I don't know how they relate to your, here is the entire site. So this is the extent of the property. There are, I guess, 4 entrances to the mine. There is one that I showed you that's capped. It would be in that vicinity. There's one right adjacent to the existing parking area. Right above it is the mine portal that I showed you, and then a 4th one up here.
So this is called Smuggler 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
Arkansas is up here, and that's on the property. I'm not aware of anything to the east. On Google, I've looked Google Earth a lot. I'm not sure of anything more to the east. I think the one you think about is up here. It's kind of up here, right?
Well, it's hard to tell. It's at that hairpin turn there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So it's interesting because
there's a little point towards that.
Yeah. And people there's a little service road here, and there's a sign that says "Keep Out."
Right.
But there are lots of people that climb over that go to the top.
Right.
It's interesting because one possible thing we could do to bring this to life is to possibly make it, as people climb the Smuggler, a point of interest could be create a little spot here that's a little point of interest and a little interpretive plaque that talks about the Smuggler mine. It would be an easy walk. It's pretty flat right there.
Yeah,
but this is part of the mine.
It just there's lots of little rivulets being carved by runoff on that tailings, and they all point in the direction of the mine. So
yeah, that's part of the retention pond captures all.
Well, it sounds as if it's off our site, but
right.
But no doubt, I mean, we're riddled with.
But it's, you know, it's like something sort of Damocles hanging above your site.
Mm-hmm. Are you saying there's tailings off property?
Well, if you take that, and there's tailings sort of right there.
Right there. This is Smuggler number 3. It's part of the mine. So it's part of the property.
So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I think that has to be whatever that is, because I just see erosion was through the thing.
Well, that's protected by the National Register of Historic Places. What the entrance of the mine has been closed. Right. It was a collapse.
I'm talking about the runoff. I'm just talking about a migrating tailings pile. That's all I'm talking.
I see. Yes. Okay.
And just one point of clarification. I know a lot of people call it tailings. The tailings comes out of a smelter. These are actually considered overburden. The technical term is overburden. But the distinction is tailings are more dangerous than overburden. So
it looks like gray soil to me. So
right.
Whatever. Sure. So and then the other thing I'd be concerned about is the long-term administration of the mine. So if the mine preservation is the incentive for the county to have, and it's only a family business, that doesn't look like a long-term administration. So there's no conservation or no conservation owner or the historical society. So there's no, I think you need a long-term, permanent, essentially, administration of it. Fine for the time being, for me, at least with a family administration, but since the house sites are going to be permanent, the administration of the mine and the continuance of the mine as a historical resource has to last forever.
And we understand that, and a part of any development application would be a draft succession plan of how this mine will be, administered in the future. So we do understand that that is one of the hurdles that we'd have to pass.
And then what about other uses of the mine, other than a tour site? So could you convert it to a data center within the hill? Could you convert it to mushroom growing? Well,
Yes.
what are the limitations or the expansion of uses in that?
There's lots of creative uses for it. I think somebody's talking about wine storage. It's 55 degrees year-round, so that'd be interesting. And so I'd be open to all of that. We need a revenue source because this is an expensive operation, and the insurance is pretty high, and there's liability issues long-term. So without a revenue source, it's going to be a drain on somebody, either the county or the Historical Society or me. And so I would be open to anything that doesn't make it, diminish the authenticity of the mine. We want it to be 1918 Aspen, Colorado.
What I'm suggesting is either a limitation or an agreement that a number of parties agree to uses. That's all I'm saying.
I think
so they're not unilateral choices.
Oh, I see.
That they're uses that 3 parties can agree on. That's
Understood. And I think the intent, as Joe just mentioned, authenticity, this is a mine, this is a historic preservation. There would be nothing that would be marring the historic preservation aspect of the mine if we were preserved.
George?
Lance, a couple questions. Given some of the ideas of having a visitor center, a museum, a retail shop, tours, would we have to rezone this to commercial, or?
We might have to look at the zoning, perhaps create some kind of special zone that would be just for this, for the commercial aspects of it. Yes, that could potentially be required.
I'm sorry, George, this is a pertinent, the Holden Roll Barn, what's the zoning there?
I don't know, it's in the city.
It's in the city, but it sounds like somewhat the same thing, where you have an historical resource that's
Yeah,
visited.
I don't know if they have a gift shop and stuff there.
I don't know how much they have there, but it's a historical resource that's visited and encouraged by the Historical Society to be visited, so we should look at what they do.
The proposed 2 lots for home sites, Lance, would you consider those lots constrained sites?
No, actually, we did a lot of research when the application came in 6, 7 years ago, and they ostensibly can meet the code provisions for constraints. The slopes, as Patrick said, can be within the code. There's a couple drainages that they have to be very careful about where the houses are located related to the drainages, because there are some that come down on the other side. But that really, they're not non-developable, which is what we commonly think of as constrained sites.
And so no mitigation would be needed?
Well, there may be something required regarding the debris flow, the drainages, to make sure that they're properly reinforced and things like that. Okay. But it was not an avalanche, it was not a rock fall.
Okay.
Rachel? Yeah, a couple of different questions. Are the mineral rights fully part of your purchase? So yes. No one else could go in and open the mine underneath you. That's correct. To pursue for it. And then would there be any commitment, or should there be, about whether the mine would reopen in the future to be an active mine?
Well, that mine is an active mine. They have their permits are they're in order for Colorado State Department of Mining and so forth. So I think they've been constrained on their mining, and they've done very little mining. But it is a commercial mine today.
There are a number of impediments that keep it from opening up to large scale.
I was going to say, where is a smelter and
well, the mine is actually filled with water. Dewatering is one of the main issues. How does the ore get transported, so on and so forth. But I think, as my understanding is, the dewatering of the mine is the main impediment. They have dewatered. There are pumps, some of the legends that exist is there are pumps at the bottom of these shafts, and they've sent guys who have
They
learned,
did, 19.
who have learned how to repair these pumps in the
Yeah.
dark with a diving bell on. But those are, you know, it's difficult. There's a lot of water there.
Okay. And I would just like to concur with the comment that Michael made. It was in my notes that, you know, at a certain point, it needs to be extremely clear how the money from the upzoning flows to the long-term successful mine operations and going forward. But, you know, Michael said it best, the houses will remain. Does an operating mine or the tourist attraction remain, and how so? Is it a escrow account? Is it, you know, I don't know what, and I don't know the pro forma to know what the expenses are, and that doesn't have to be answered now. I'm just saying that if we got to an application time period, that would be, you know, pivotal to the public interest.
One thing that might be helpful to know is that they use volunteer tour guides today.
Mhm.
They have very minimal insurance, and it's not a moneymaker.
Right.
So, you know, I think it's going to be a net investment for whoever owns it for a period of time.
Yeah.
Especially if you build a museum, visitor center, parking, and all, and that ramp that goes up, that kind of a switchback ramp that goes up with interpretive areas, and it's going to be done right, but it's going to be expensive.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be. There are unknowns there as well. But it just, again, just putting that aside, if you're looking at the incentives, there has to be that very clear and believable connection. The other thing, I guess, you know, for the board and all of us to consider, I mean, on the one hand, it seems that this property is already on the National Historic Register, the mine itself, although the buildings, as you say, are not historic that are there now. So without an action to upzone and subdivide, this would only be entitled to one house at 29 acres. You wouldn't be able to or would you be able to subdivide into two lots?
Yes.
Separate from preserving the mine? I mean, I guess that's what I wanted to hear. Maybe George was getting at that with the constrained site location. What would be the...
29 acres, so there could be, and there's one development right.
So there could be two?
There could be two lots. There could be a mine site and a house site.
Okay. Or there could be a mine site with a house on it, even though it's in the National Historic
Yes.
Register.
Be a 129.7 acre lot with a house on it.
And so the real difference is the visitability and the preservation of the asset.
Correct.
And the houses, if it was just a flat subdivision, we weren't doing preservation, would start at the 5750, and there would not necessarily be any opportunity to upzone those. I mean, they could be asked for, but it would be discretionary.
Yeah, the part of the available incentives would be to grant additional intensity, more square footage.
Let me just
Go ahead.
follow up on one of those questions. So you said the current zoning allows for a house in the mine is one lot. But if it's subdivided into two lots, can you have one 14-acre lot with a house and the other 14-acre lot with a house and the mine?
No.
So the mine...
There's only one development right.
So the mine is the development right.
There would be a single-family home development right in addition to the mine with 30 acres.
So, but if it was subdivided,
There would be, one of those two lots could have a house.
but you don't get the second.
Correct. That's what
House.
growth management requires.
Yeah.
is
You'd have to
get the
compete through
second.
You have to
GMQS.
but you could compete and potentially get a second development.
That's all. So
Yeah, I just
as
wanna
we
make sure
discuss
it's
it
clear.
further, it'd be nice to have what would a development path be forward should there not be preservation going forward? Because, I mean, that's the kind of the position we're being asked to look at some point in the future of the upzoning of the house sizes. I have to say, it's very uncomfortable to try to look at this and say, well, it could be 5750 and it could be 15,000 square feet, as you said in your letter to us, and you might be able to visualize a well-designed, somewhat hidden 5750 or perhaps even a little larger house. It's very hard to imagine that the historic integrity truly remains if it's on two sides with a 15,000 square foot house. To me, it would seem both out of context and, hard to find, and, it just, and I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of the I-70 mines that I have visited before, when you go up and you see, mine tours on the side of the hill, and you see all the old stamping plants, and, you have the context of Georgetown and Silver Plume. Yeah, Silver Plume. But this would not have any context left to it at all, over there. And so, the unknown house sizes and what is an appropriate house size there is a very big outstanding question mark for me.
Steve, and then Michael.
This first question for Lance, it mentions transferable development rights as one of the incentives. Does that mean they would possibly be allowed to use it as a landing site for TDRs in order to build a bigger house? Or that it would
Essentially, it
be
means
ascending site?
Yeah, essentially it means not ascending site. Essentially it means receiving TDRs.
Receiving site, okay, landing site.
But not having to go out and purchase TDRs. The TDRs would be granted.
Might be issued one.
Issued for use on the site.
As an incentive to use on the site. Okay, I just wanted to clarify what that meant. I see the site as, thinking that 2 home sites on it is what they could go for anyhow, with just doing 2 15-acre lots, and could apply for 2 home sites. But do you see one of the second home site would be a free market thing that you would need to sell in order to fund the funding for the maintaining of the mining site?
Yeah, I'd like to keep my options open. It could be very, very well that I can only build one for my own family use, but the economics of this are very challenging. It's on the market for 9.5, it dropped to 7.5 million. 7.5 million for a piece of dirt with an obligation to maintain a mine with the legal implications to go with it. It's a tough economic situation, and it's been on the market for some time. So I would like to have the opportunity that if the economics present themselves, I would have the opportunity to mitigate some of my costs by selling the second home. But I'd be living in the other one, so I'm not going to let anything happen to make my house look bad. And I do have taste run more modest than 15,000. I mean, so I can see doing something very tasteful because want to be a member of the community and be able to get a dinner reservation, so I don't want to have it be an eyesore.
Yeah. So just to let you know kind of my feelings, that I think I would be okay with having 2 home sites. I would, like you, Rachel, I'd be really skeptical of a monster home. Right. I'd be a lot more comfortable with a more modest size of home. One question, we're talking about having to do a code change in order to allow the 3 lots. Would it be possible to just do 2 lots and have one of the homes would also have the mine on it, and then we wouldn't have to go through a code change to accomplish that?
Well, previous discussions, people have wanted to keep the mine site separate and not have it tied into a home site. I'm not sure that has to be the case, but I can see why somebody might want to keep the house site separate from the mine site. Because the mine can go on, if we have the proper provisions to make sure that it goes on forever. It could go on forever independently of the 2 homeowners and who they are. But if the home's on the same site as the mine site, that could be different.
That could be a problem. I could see that, and I guess that would be in splitting it into 3 lots, with the mine site possibly being 9.7 acres instead of 10. And in terms of a succession plan for really long term, like I was thinking, the first thing that popped into my mind was the Aspen Historical Society perhaps being the entity that ultimately might own or at least operate the tours of the mine site. So that's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
And one thing in terms of the homes, house sizes and the lot sizes, I'd be curious to know what are on the exact the immediate adjacent lands. I know some of it is, you get into multiple townhome kind of a things.
Lower down. The Centennial is, for instance, kind of in the vicinity of our graphics.
But if there are,
But here, this is county land, and then there's a home here at 8,200 feet. But there's a buffer there that's owned by the county. And then on this side, Silver Brick is the name of the thing, it's that county owned. That was, so this is county owned and that's county owned. And across the top, of course, you have the easement for these roads.
but there are something we ask, like, for certain home sizes, does it fit into the neighborhood?
Correct, yeah, neighborhood context, yeah.
Yeah.
There are larger homes adjacent to this, certainly going up to 8,200.
Is 18,000 square foot.
Yeah, but certainly that would be something that we would discuss.
Michael?
Yeah, I'm less concerned about the house sizes. Rachel, we've talked about this before in historical preservation, where, and I'm thinking of the site in Woody Creek that was the old Henley place, where you have a very modest cabin, and then you have a ranch house, and now you have a very modern house, and it really gives a historical narrative of how the town has progressed. We've lost most of the context of mining context. If you go out in the hallway out here, there's a wonderful picture of the Smuggler Mine. That's all gone. I mean, there's no, if you were to look up in that direction, you would hardly know there's a mine except for some disturbance. So I think it's important for people to understand this town from a historical perspective, because they tend to come to town and think, well, this has always been a prosperous town, it's a very exclusive town, it's a very chic town. And the fact of the matter is that the history is fairly short, and it's not that at all. It's a hard-scrabble, difficult place to live, a difficult place to extract wealth, and one of the ways they do it now is not to disturb the interior of the surface, but to put on large houses. That's just part of our historical inheritance. And so if we were to concede that, the preservation of the mine itself, I think, is very important, because that's the last, I mean, I don't know that, are there other mines we can go into in Pickens County? I'm just, I'm asking rhetorical questions. So do we want to visit the gravel pit? No, I think we want to go inside this mountain and get a sense of what it was like to be a miner in those days. The sacrifice is to concede to present-day Aspen, Colorado, which is large houses. It's a trade-off, but I'd need permanence. That's what I'd need. So.
I want to just weigh in on a few things, and then I'll go to you, George. I couldn't agree with you more, Michael. I think Georgia Hansen, who was the director of the Historical Society, often came to us and said, sense of place. That's what this town is about, a sense of place, and that historical value of someone coming to this town and having this connection of the mining town to, through the Hotel Jerome, through the mines that are around here, skiing by mine shafts when you're skiing in the wintertime, to walking down the street to some of the historical buildings that are in town. But the actual mine itself is a jewel and a treasure. I really think that this application is going to hinge on how the mine site is treated. There are a lot of things, that I think questions that have been raised here in terms of sustainability and perpetuity. The idea that there's this private park, but it's on a separate lot, and then the two owners may be gone long, way down the road, but that private park is controlled by those two owners, and that's the entity that needs to be sustained, which is the mine. So I think that needs to be worked out. special events. I know Food and Wine does special events up there on that mine site, and I know some other people do special events on that wine site. It's certainly a revenue source, but you've got neighbors, you've got aspects, so the zoning of this towards a commercial property, I think, is essential as part of this application, and what restrictions or allowances are made on that piece of property for maintaining the revenue source that's going to be needed for this jewel of an amenity, and I definitely call it a jewel of an amenity. So I don't think, and I think what you're doing here is coming for advice on how this application is going to be, felt by the board. It's hard to say what variances or what code changes or what TDRs we would give for something without really knowing how that something is going to be created and protected. So that's the big aspect. I'm very much in favor of making sure that that is created and protected. But those are the elements that I think are the hard pieces to come together. So I don't know if that gives you much direction or whatnot, but I think that's the crucial piece for me, less than home size, and because I think those things will have some play in it, but it's really about that third lot and how that third lot interacts with, community being able to visit it. If you're saying restricted visitation, what does that mean? Is there, a certain number of visits per year you're going to commit to, those sorts of things? George?
I take a different perspective. I think that to be able to upgrade and have the Smuggler Mine be a great tourist attraction is wonderful. I reflect back, or if you've ever been down to Bisbee, Arizona, that is a tremendous educational tourist attraction, but it's low key. It's in a very small old mining town. You've got a lot of Victorian houses all around there, and it's in character with the time. And so, Patrick, when you talk about wanting to protect the rural area, what that means to me is that we don't have large houses that are out of character with that historic mining era. Even though there are some other larger houses off to the side, this is a highly visible site from town, from the community. And the last thing I wanted to see is a large house. And so I would not personally agree to any TDRs onto this site. The other issues that we really haven't talked about is what you're looking for is exemptions from GMQS for subgrade space floor area and affordable housing mitigation requirements. So here you're talking about creating a museum, creating a gift shop, having a tours, a visitor center. That is a commercial aspect that's going to generate employees, and I don't see how or why we would want to give up any employee mitigation. That just goes against everything that we're trying to do here. We just had a meeting with the Aspen School Board and talking about the not the desired need, but the drastic need in terms of employee housing for them. So that's a non-starter for me as well. I don't have a problem with giving you the extra lot. I assume that extra lot was going to be a real estate deal to help finance this. I understand that. But for me, it's got to be in the character of what you're trying to do. If you're trying to maintain or create a historic site, well, then that's what you need to do. I'm a little concerned about, and this is a detail, but traffic. I don't know whether we even want to consider parking areas versus having to utilize public transit. You've got a parking garage right here. You've got buses that go right up there. So why would we want to encourage traffic into those neighborhoods? Those are my main concerns.
Rachel?
Yeah, just tagging on, I agree with what George has had to say, although I will say I'm less concerned about the traffic in that area. I think as a percentage of growth, it would be incredibly minor. And encouraging people to take the bus is great, but I think that there's, more often than not, it tends to be a tour from a given hotel, and they shuttle the people up in the hotel van and things like that. It is a little bit of a steep grade for some people from sea level coming up to visit. Yeah, it can get you there. But I am concerned about, quote, code changes in general, because it's very hard to ever find a code change that applies to only one property and that we don't have ramifications and precedent with it in other places. So how we could, do less than 10-acre lots. I understand we could craft and craft and craft, but too often sitting in this chair, you see someone who brings forward something that was designed 5 years ago for a different project. Now they believe it's their loophole for that project. So I would be very concerned about beginning to set precedents for different things being exempt from some of our current processes that are there for neighborhood input and neighborhood opportunities. I'll say on the other hand, though, there's been so little true competition in GMQS, and we've asked and talked a lot about lowering the available FAR for those annual competitions, that it's hard for me to believe that a good plan going forward wouldn't result in a subdivision in 2 lots, period, anyhow, whether it's mine preservation or not. And so that's the challenge. It seems to me, again, if I was condensing it down, that there can and would eventually be 2 lots there through GMQS, no mine preservation, no public mine access. Those lot sizes might be reduced in size of the home below 5750 because of the slope or other issues. I don't know that. That would take analysis by our staff, but it might be far smaller homes because of those steep slopes. Or on the other hand, seeing the preservation, the public access, the resource, which you've outlined very well, and I can tell you have a real interest in those subjects as well. But then it comes to, well, how much what is the community's tolerance for the incentives? And that it relates to me to house size. I know, Michael, the Woody Creek example is one thing. You see that home on a very short period of time on the road. This will overlook town forever. I mean, this is not visible to people going up and down the Woody Creek Road, and once you're past it, you're back in the bucolic neighborhood. This is a mountain that, our community has spent millions of dollars to try to preserve from inappropriate development, and that's been primarily the top half. It's a mountain that we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on mitigating the bark beetles and habitat management and everything like that. So there's a lot at stake with the aesthetics of that land, that hillside to the community. And so I don't know how you really begin that community dialogue to say, is the trade-off some of us are willing to make for the preservation mean we'll take two 15,000 square foot houses or 2 12,000 square foot houses, or is it better to say, hey, you go to the mine on Aspen Mountain, this one's not going to be a public amenity, and it's going to be 2 houses that are 5750 or less. Those are really what we're going to end up with, in my mind, at the end of the day. And you make a good enough proposal and modest enough house size, and we'll hear from the community. We'll hear how people feel about it. So, but you're right. It is highly visible, and whatever happens there, we'll all hear about for a long time.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's going to be part of the conversation if this application moves forward. I'm not saying that I'm not concerned at all with house size. Not that I don't think you were correctly alluding to me, but I think I might have been misconstrued that way. But I also do recognize that this is a tough economic deal for anybody doing that, and people have to understand that you want an amenity like a park with even just limited access, with a mine that connects the mining history of this town, it doesn't come by someone just donating it. It comes by someone developing one side of the property to be able to do the other side of the property, and that development has a valuation to make it work. It's just like some of the hotels in town that they're trying to allow free market housing to get the bed base back into Aspen. So I think, that has to be part of the conversation that, again, how does it sustain itself economically, in an economic way, in perpetuity, when it's being built by the houses, but then it needs to be sustained? If you say you're going to sell that third lot or whatever, at least create the value of that third lot. So, any other comments? Thank you.
I wanted to show this picture just briefly. That when we say a private park, I guess what we're saying is the aesthetics are going to look like a park, and it's going to be cleaned up. Today it has a garage, a metal workshop, and it's used for storage. So the park, it's going to be a park-like aesthetic.
Thank you. Good feedback. We appreciate that.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Can we just take 4 minutes, break?
Yeah, because they need to break down and stuff. So let's come back at 4:30. And we only have a couple items, I
Yeah,
think.
we only have a couple items.
So it'll be quick.
Yeah.
She said, oh, well.
Welcome, we're back. Finishing up our work session today, we've got open discussion. And I don't know, Phyllis, if you've got some more stuff with us. We've tackled one item already.
Yeah.
I know Rachel has an item.
I had one on the, you had asked when we interviewed the last applicant for the housing board, if the current joint member would be interested in being, I guess they're a joint alternate, if they'd be interested in being the regular county member, and they would. They were appointed in March, Rob, so they're
Okay.
not that long ago. So we looked that up. So if you would like to appoint that person, I had her name, but I can't find it.
Kathleen.
Oh, Kathleen's who we interviewed. It's Michelle Creasy is the current joint alternate. So if you wanted to appoint her, or do you want to interview her for the regular position, and then we would let Kathleen know that we would consider her as a joint alternate. Probably advertise still for the joint alternate, but then the city would also need to interview her. So it's kind of
Rachel?
mix up.
Yeah, I'm okay with moving the current joint alternate up to a regular position. I would like to discuss any future appointments more while, if we're actually talking about potential appointments. I greatly appreciated Kathleen's desire to get involved and volunteer, and she said she saw the ad. But I have a feeling that we just need people on the housing board who have more direction in mind to begin with, either experience living in deed-restricted units or trying to compete for deed-restricted units, or some of those issues. I mean, I don't think any of us got particularly tough with the questions, which I normally have done on other applicants. Have you attended any housing board meetings yet? Have you read the housing guidelines? What do you think of them? What do you think of these other programs? And I just didn't see, I saw an interest to serve, but I didn't see a burning connection to the housing problem, or a burning direction to bring the housing issue, which other people have come in to really say what they think it needs to be more responsive to and how. And so I feel bad that I didn't think to ask at the time, are there other boards you'd be interested in serving on that might be a better fit for the skills and the sense of community and the desire to volunteer, which I fully appreciate. But I thought we should re-advertise the position.
George?
I have a question on the joint alternate right now. So we have a joint regular, and then I didn't realize we had an alternate joint as well. So
that's the only alternate there is.
That's
There's
the only
one
alternate
joint
there is.
alternate.
Okay, so that alternate we would move into this county opening, and then we would need to advertise along with city council for another joint alternate. Okay, and so since we're going to go that route, that it would make sense just to reopen that up because it's a slightly different position.
Right.
That's what I would do.
Okay, so we will appoint Michelle, the current joint alternate, into our county regular and advertise, and let the city know that.
Yeah. And I would not preclude having Catherine apply for that and then interview with the city.
And we'll make sure she knows that's what's going on. So, and is she interested in the joint alternate position, which may be a better position coming new into the housing board too?
Yeah, if that's what the majority of the board would like to do, I fully support it, and I certainly support the first half. But I would not be a vote for her to be the joint alternate for the reasons I just listed. I think there really needs, and so I don't want to send her over to the city if our board would then come back and say, well, actually, we're not approving her for that alternate position. It gets a little awkward.
Okay, well, I would have no problem appointing her to the alternate position because that gives someone the opportunity as a learning point.
Thoughts?
I'm kind of with you, Rachel, that I felt she has lots of qualifications, but they didn't really have anything to do with knowledge of the housing thing and just the fact that she, has lived a short while in Hunter Creek. But I felt like she was a, fairly weak candidate for the position. If we had two to pick from, there probably would be a stronger person for the position.
I'd love to see our energies on the senior council where we have a number of openings remaining, I believe, for alternates and things like that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that might be where the retirement and housing issue and problem will be better solved.
And the senior council actually discusses housing issues quite frequently. That's one of the issues. So.
Okay, so it sounds like we're opening the application up for new applicants, and maybe suggesting the senior council to that individual, but we're looking for somebody to fill the alternate app.
Well, we can advertise and see if we have any
Yeah.
applicants, and if after a time we don't, and we can still say
Yeah.
we're just going to leave her application in if she's interested
Yeah.
in being a joint alternate. Okay. Got it. That was the only one I had.
Yeah, I handed out the more complete background information that goes with the history of the Land and Water Conservation Fund and a sample letter. I've briefed the board before through the National Association of County work that PILT is not going to, it's not reauthorized right now for the next year's budget. There's been efforts to see if both the Land and Water Conservation Fund and PILT may be funded out of the same resources. This, as you get to the closing two paragraphs, it really doesn't link the two in the way of saying that they both have to be together or not. It doesn't say Land and Water Conservation has to become the fund for PILT. It just says that both of these two programs work together very closely, and we encourage both of their reauthorizations. This is being generated from some work that the Sonoran Institute is doing, primarily to try to make sure the Land and Water Conservation Fund is reauthorized. It's interesting to see the requests that have come through for Land and Water Conservation Fund. I know Dale Will and the Open Space Board have always been prioritized its reauthorization and its full funding, and we've made that our request to NACO before as well as to CCI. But to see that both Polis and Tipton and Gardner have put in requests for specific funding for some of the wildlife and monument areas in their districts. So it is a good program. I don't think we've ever competed well here. It was thought of as a source for some of our projects, but we've never really competed well. But it is an important program. So I would just like to see if we could go on the record and support a letter that is endorsing both of the reauthorizations of both of those programs.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yep.
The question, Rachel, these projects seem like specific projects for specific funding requests from the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Is that the kind of funding they do, or does the fund also potentially just provide for ongoing operational expenses of the different monuments and whatnot?
No, it really is not a maintenance fund, and there's been some discussion about whether it should be restructured to do more ongoing maintenance costs. I don't know what's going to come out of the sausage maker in DC. There's some logic to that, and as you guys all know, there's a lot of resistance with some in the West to say the federal government shouldn't own any more land, and it shouldn't own any land or any public entity. And so there's a flat-out, opposition to any more conservation that's out there. But one of their arguments is that there's no real maintenance fund. And so, perhaps this will get modified in DC to create more maintenance funds for new lands that are brought off the tax rolls and out of the private sector and into the public realm. Okay. And
Are there changes to that letter, or do you want?
I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the
I'm
formatting.
okay with it.
Yeah.
And Rachel, I appreciate I know more about the fund now than I ever did before, just thanks to you for providing this information sheet on that.
And I apologize, I meant to give it to you at the end of the meeting with the city last week, but I forgot.
Any other open discussion?
I did want to bring up, I don't believe our board has discussed, but I've seen any number of citizen letters and some comments about the potential closure or the reduction of hours at the Woody Creek Post Office. And, you know, Michael, I don't know if with your connections through the caucus, has the caucus taken a recommendation, or is there, you know,
They're on the cusp of sending you a request for a resolution to support the Woody Creek Post Office at full hours, full operation. So that's, I just got some communication, so they'll be sending that to you to ask for a resolution.
Ask for support from the federal, for the post office to support it, funded fully.
Yeah, to send to the post office and our congressional delegation.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, my feeling is that there's very little holding this country together. You know, it's sort of spinning apart in its own interest groups. And rural post offices is one of the things that does. Because people learn about who's been born, who's died, who's been divorced. And aside from politics and some of the things that divide us, it's a foundation for a good community. So if they start cutting that back, they start cutting back vibrancy of communities.
Rachel?
yeah, you know, there's a lot going on. I've seen a presentation by the new postmaster, and how for a long time they're gearing up for the mail volumes that were going up and big distribution centers, how they're going to handle it all with the next day requirement, things like that. And then, of course, the market and the world changed with the internet and online shopping and online bill pay, and that whole, you know, operating mode quickly became shelf life. Concurrent with that was then kind of the deficit reduction measures in DC, and some who don't like government facilities would like to see this privatized in its entirety. So you have that requirement that they have to fully fund their pension within 10 years for all employees, which is adding to the quarterly deficits as part of their operating loss that they seem to keep reporting. If some of those strictures were changed and they could operate like other federal agencies, it would reduce the deficit, and also some of the anti-competition things that the post office has to work under, you know. And if you're any other business, you would be thinking about, well, maybe I could add computer terminals, and people could pay $10 for an hour and they could pay all their bills here at the post office, and, you know, or other ways to service the modern society. But that has just not been the intent at the federal government level of finding ways to fix the budget deficit. But a long way to get around to it. At the end of the day, all the rural legislators are the ones who are hearing, you're closing our post office. All your budget cutting and your purse tightening and everything else, it's hitting us where we live. And we need a post office, whether it's buying money orders or whatever, because there's no banks left in the towns on the rural plains. So I believe it's a very big uphill battle, but we should, you know, be able to give a comment to our state reps and to the federal government that it encompasses at some level the big problem, and how it could be solved, and how important these communities are to, you know, all these facilities are to our community.
Steve?
I was surprised to see in all the publicity about the Woody Creek Post Office, the information about the Snowmass Post Office, which is mine, that there's fewer boxes there, and that the rural mail delivery is now handled by the Basalt Post Office and not by ours. That was all new information to me. And I can see different possible solutions. That, for instance, doing away with the rural delivery is a possibility, because everybody used to go to the post office to get their mail, and I wouldn't mind going back to that if that could save the post office $2 billion a year, and, you know, just cut a cost in a different fashion than cutting the hours of the actual post office. The people back in the 1890s from our area actually got their mail at Watson, Colorado. That's what Watson Divide is named after. And you know, I'd hate to lose the post office at Snowmass also, just like Woody Creek, because that's part of our identity. And if drastic measures are needed to save it, I'd be willing to to entertain those ideas even beyond, I mean, I'd rather keep the hours longer at the post office and do away with the rural delivery if that's what's needed.
Yeah. What I'm wondering from a staff level is perhaps we could, in anticipation of receiving this resolution from the Woody Creek Caucus, talk to some of our congressional reps' offices or Senate to say, you know, what's the bigger landscape and what can we do? You know, how could we be effective, or can they get involved in these decisions, or, you know, I don't know what, but I think trying to understand the bigger landscape, either from Representative Tipton's office or Senator Bennett's or Senator Udall's office, some of their staffers, that'd be helpful. I'm sure it's not the first time they've heard the issue.
All right, anything else? I'll call the meeting adjourned.
All right, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.